starting with Dr. Alex Horn and HBH Consulting Engineers making presentation on potential aeration project.
All right. So I've been given the pleasure to introduce Dr. Horn and Mr. Mike Henry and Andre Chernishoff. I probably butchered his last name. It's not too bad, apparently. Dr. Horn is Professor Emeritus and creator of the Ecological Engineering Group at UC Berkeley, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He has a PhD in limnology and oceanography from the University of Dundee in Scotland. Dissertation titled Nitrogen and Carbon Fixation in Aquatic Ecosystems of Europe, Antarctica, and Africa. His Bachelor of Science also from the UK, University of Bristol in England, biological chemistry, with a special competence in pure and applied limnology and oceanography, and his CV is much too long to print on this one sheet, let alone 17, 20 sheets of paper. So I'll leave it at that. And then we have HBH Engineering and Consultants, Mike Henry and Andre Chernishoff. They are specialists in systems development charge studies, stormwater planning and design, street planning and design, plan reviews, do some work that's been done. I think we just lost my audio. Testing. Okay. In fact, they're out of Newberg, Oregon, so they've done some work right here for the city of Lincoln City, including the recent West Devils Lake pump station down at the north end of the lake. So together they have a presentation, and I'll get them set up, and I'm going to move to the other side so I can watch too.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
Good evening. Thank you for the invite to come up here, and if you've got any spare water, I can sell it down in Southern California right now. You all know your lake better than I do. You all know the problems better than I do, and we're faced with a solution, or coming up with a solution. So what I'd like to do first is just go through what options you have to fix lakes. And I've talked with Paul, I've been up on the lake with him, I've looked around, I've looked at your data, and we've come to a conclusion, probably something like an aeration, oxygenation, mixing system might be your answer. But you shouldn't jump right onto that without thinking about it. Are there any other alternatives? Are you missing something? So part of what I'm going to do is show you the options are available. And there are 17 methods, basically, for lake management and 5 for watershed classifications. We won't run through them all, but I'll go through a few, because the first part of what I need to do for you is do the formal exercise before we come up with some final options. And since we think we know what the options are likely to be, that's why we have HDH here, and I'll go through some of the advantages we might have there. Well, who needs these methods? Well, we all do. These are a bunch of lakes in California, basically. Everybody's got the same problems. These blue-green algae, eutrophication, too many nutrients, no oxygen in the deep water. Everybody has the same problems. But the solutions are not always the same. And I might add that those are from California. I'm right now involved in 5 reservoirs in Virginia. They have very much the same problems. They're very much the same answers. This is not really a regional thing. We've got lakes and reservoirs that have been around for quite a while, and we've polluted them, and we've got to fix it, and it doesn't matter where you live. Well, this is the thing that we have to come up with first. What really are your problems? Because that's what we have to solve, and this will be something that I've already talked to Paul about this, on your behalf, of course, and you can see the problems here. If we look at them, we've got blue-green algae blooms on the surface. The direct cause is probably nutrients, like nitrate, phosphate, so on. And the indirect causes are we've got nutrients coming from the bottom. The way algae grow is the nutrients either come from the bottom, that is the mud, and they're exacerbated if there's no oxygen down there, or they come from the watershed. Pretty straightforward stuff. Look at the next one, low dissolved oxygen in the bottom water, dead algae, because they sink to the bottom and die and rot, use up all the oxygen. You're breathing 20% oxygen by volume right now. In a lake, it's 0.5%. So there's 40 times less oxygen in a litre of water than there is a litre of air. So it's really easy to lose oxygen in water. And it's one of the problems we have. Then we've got possible toxicity. This is not a drinking water supply, so you don't have so much to worry about. But you still have problems. Every so often, probably 2 or 3 times a year, somebody calls me up, and they're usually a vet, and they say, I've got these dead dogs that have arrived in my facility. They drank water in the lake. So we have to try and get rid of that problem too. Bad egg odors, bad smells at night. Nobody likes to sit out there with their evening cocktail and smell bad eggs. Again, it's no oxygen in the deep water. Watershed problems, too many nutrients essentially, too much nitrogen and phosphorus coming either from natural conditions, exaggerated natural conditions, or things like septic tanks, and just general runoff from things like fertilizer in farms, cows, pigs, whatever you've got. But what you'll notice there is the two things are sort of highlighted there, and they're algae, blue-green algae, and nutrients. So the way I look at the problem is we've got to deal with blue-green algae and nutrients. Well, you already know that, so let's move on. This is a little background. What you can see here is 4 graphs, and we've got on the top physics, then we've got chemistry, then we've got biology, and then we've got more complex biology. And the key thing we have here is this graph here, the biological. This is algae numbers against time through the seasons. In the spring, algae grow because the sunlight comes. Just like the daffodils grow, the algae grow. And just like the daffodils, they die because it's time, and in this case, they run out of nutrients. And then we go down. But what happens next is that when the fall comes, the lake mixes around, some more nutrients come from the bottom, the trees are not taking out so many nutrients from the streams, so the streams have more nutrients, and we get a second bloom of algae in the fall. And sometimes they're blue-green algae. That's fine, that's what we want to be. But what happens is this middle bit. If we get too many nutrients, the algae last all through the season. And that's the problem most of us have. We have, during the peak recreational season, we have algae in the summer. If we look back up here and we look at the nutrients, we can see that in an undisturbed system, the nutrients are high in the winter, they're used by the algae in the summer, and they come back again in the winter. But when things go wrong, they never drop down. And this top graph shows that the surface temperature, the heating, the cooling, and so on. And the point is here, and more so in our climates now, it's warm for most of the year. If it's warm, it's harder for the wind to mix the water. And that means we get stratification. So we get layers of the surface water is a bit warmer than the water below, which is a bit warmer than the water below. And if you're a good algae like a diatom, which is an algae that's made of silica, you sink because there's no mixing. But if you're a blue-green algae, you've been clever enough to have little bubbles of air inside you which allow you to float. And if you're a big blue-green algae, or a colony, you have a big blob. And Stokes' law says that you float very fast. That is why blue-green algae grow. They like calm, warm conditions, just like we do for water skiing, so they can float to the top. They can outcompete anybody else. So that's our problem. We can't get around the temperature part and the stratification part directly. But obviously, you'll see where mixing might come into this. So, what's the overview? The idea I'm proposing for you is formally go through the 17 methods of lake management and 5 watershed methods, pick out the most suitable method. Now, I've already done that to some extent, and I've worked with Paul on this. So preliminary examinations suggest that some kind of aeration, oxygenation mixing, something to hit at the Achilles heel of these blue-green algae, their ability to float in calm water, is a likely solution. But there may be another method lurking. For instance, a common method that people use to clean up lakes is to add alum. Alum fixes phosphorus in the sediments, and so it can't get out. And it's a very effective method. But of course, if you've new phosphorus coming in from the watershed, it's not going to last very long, and alum's not cheap. But we need to look at that and just be sure we've got everything. The reason I say this is I might come back in 5 years, and many of you may not be here, and somebody else will say, well, why didn't we do this? Well, we can say, well, here's the report, this is why we didn't do it. Maybe wrong or right, but at least you've got a record. Okay, then I bring the recommendations back, discuss it with Paul and you say, okay, this looks like it's the way to go. If that's so, and this is likely to be the solution, then we work with HBH, your local consultants, to provide the detailed engineering drawings so that this thing can be built by, you can put it out to bid for a contractor, as you already know. What I'll do is I'll work with everybody who needs to be involved to do the conceptual design, the rationale, and give the design numbers. HBH will then take those numbers and translate them into feet of pipe, aeration devices, or whatever it might be that we're going to use. Ken O'Hara, who I call Dr. Aeration, who's an expert on the details of aeration that I'm not, will assist me in the design specs by providing things like pipe sizes and diffuser sizes that will help HBH make their decisions. And Paul will work with me, I hope, most of the time, because he's a lot more experienced in the lake than me, and I think he has some pretty good ideas. I think he even reads the literature. You're probably a professor or something, not me, but anyway, whatever it is, I'll work with you to work out these technical details and save time. I want to just take you through briefly these methods. We have 17 methods: physical methods, chemical methods, biological methods, and biomanipulation. Let's look at some physical ones. I'm just going to show you a few to give you a flavor. This is all of them, but I'm going to talk. You can get all sorts of things. You can imagine a physical method is dredging. Dredging's a fine method, but it's expensive. You could actually go to the algae and you could actually harvest them with nets. You can actually suck them up and harvest them. It's kind of difficult, but you can do it. You can seal the sediment. You can stop things getting out of the sediment by adding, you can actually put a barrier there if it's small, or you could add a chemical like alum. So there are a number of these methods in the physical section, and I'll just talk about 3 of them in a bit more detail: dredging, destratification, and lakeshore wetlands. You may or may not need these. We'll just look at them so it gives you an idea of the range of options you have. Dredges are great. We all know that the lake was probably cleaner 100 years ago, and it certainly, since you had some worse blooms in 2014, is worse now than it was 20 years ago. If you take out those bottom layers, probably this much, 40 centimeters, something like this, for legacy pollutants, we call them. The nitrogen and phosphorus that came from the septic tanks, that came from a cow that might have excreted upstream, that kind of thing. You can dig them out. You all know this. You could build artificial islands, you could build a small hill, you could do this. But of course it's not cheap. It's about $15 per cubic meter, cubic yard. So it's not for larger lakes like this one, it's not so good. But you need to think about it. This is just giving an example. This is Lily Lake, a small lake, and you can see 2 years after dredging, the chlorophyll and the Secchi depth, which is the water clarity, all those parameters there in the central column, and a few years later it went down. So the lake cleaned up. In this lake, what they did is they had a small community nearby. They diverted the sewage away, they cleaned up the water supply, they added alum, or they dredged it in this case rather, and it cleaned up. You could have added alum and got the same results. You can't do that, unfortunately, because you can't stop all the pollutants coming into the lake, at least not yet. But it's a good method. This is one we might look at: destratification and lake mixing. Aeration, mixing, something like this is the most common method of restoration of lakes. There are thousands of lakes around the world where people have got some kind of bubbling system going on. Some are good, some work, some don't work as well. But they're common, and this is looking like a possible option. These are just some examples from around the world. Basically, you've got to stir the lake. You could do it with a giant wooden spoon if you wanted. It doesn't matter how you mix it. You can use a propeller, or you can use air. But the air in this case just is a lift pump. It doesn't add any oxygen. One of the things about aeration in lakes to realize, it's not like the stuff HBA normally designs, which is with fine bubbles in a flat-bottomed sewage treatment system where you're putting a lot of energy, a lot of air, tiny bubbles, and getting oxygen transferred from the air. Air's only 20% oxygen anyway. That won't work in lakes. These things clog up too easily. They really would be hard to do. What we use is coarser bubbles, so like a bubble plume, and it sucks in other water and mixes things around. So it's just like a big stirring device. That's what aeration mixing is in a lake. The difference is that when we go to a new technique, which is called vigorous epilimnetic mixing, or VEM, is that we put more aerators in and we mix more of the lake. And again, it gets back to this thing that blue-green algae like to have well-stratified warm water. They don't like mixed water. It's not their way. Chemical methods, you can use things like herbicides. You can also use oxygenation. It's a chemical method in the sense that it changes the sediments. If you add oxygen to the sediments, phosphorus and ammonia that come out no longer come out. Phosphorus stays down as ferric phosphate in the sediments, which is a method that's often used. Ammonia is transferred to nitrate and denitrified, and so oxygen is a chemical way of messing with the chemistry in the sediments so that the nutrients don't come out of the sediments. Alum itself is a chemical method because alum binds with phosphate to form alum phosphate, aluminum phosphate, which is insoluble. So once you get to aluminum phosphate, it's down there forever, no matter what the oxygen does. But of course, if new phosphorus comes on top, that will not be bound by the alum. So there's a chemical set of methods you've got. This is an example of oxygenation in Comanche Reservoir, which is it's on the Feather River, not far from San Francisco, inland, of course. And you can see here, before oxygen, we call HOS, which is hypolimnetic, that is the deeper, cooler water oxygenation system. This reservoir is about 90 feet deep. So you can see that before oxygenation in the summer, there was no oxygen. We added oxygen and it went up. That changed the sediment chemistry and cleaned up the lake. Unfortunately, you've not got 90 feet. But other than that, it would work fine. You can use algicides. This is some data from Virginia from this last year. You can see here's a bloom of the red bars there are blue-green algae, and you can see that when copper was added, the blue-green algae were killed. Everybody can do this. You sometimes have problems with the regulatory agencies because most copper comes in as the ionic copper. You add it as an ionic copper, and it's toxic. It doesn't stay very long, but it's there, and things like salmonid fish in particular, especially young salmonid fish, they don't like copper, even at low levels. So there are problems with regulation and problems with use. But nevertheless, it's a system that you should need to look at just to make sure that it's not what you want, or maybe you want to use it in emergencies. Biomanipulation, this would be the ideal method for us all. It's the long-term method based on ecological engineering, which is my discipline. Basically, what you do is you manipulate the ecosystem so that you get things you want and they get rid of the things you don't want. In shallow lakes that are eutrophic, it's been very successful. Basically, what it does is you make sure you have a lot of these small zooplankton, little guys about this big water fleas, big daphnia, we call them, and they'll eat algae. You also have submerged aquatic vegetation, which assists in providing somewhere for these zooplankton to hide during the day, because otherwise they'd be eaten by the fish. But in this case, I don't think you can do it all. First of all, with grass carp, you've got rid of most of your macrophytes. Of course, you may have them back unless you can get a permit to put more grass carp in, which we'll see about that in the future. But this will occur as part of any system we do, because if you make the lake healthier, you will have more of these algae. In terms of management, you would, in this case, manage the small fish. The small fish eat daphnia because they're like hamburgers to a small fish. So you would probably net out the small fish and keep them at a certain level. This would give you the amount of daphnia you need, which would eat the algae, which give you clearer water. And that is one option you have, but you have to make the lake a bit friendlier for them by adding oxygen or air. This is daphnia, the guy on its back there with the helmet, and they go about like this and they filter algae. But like I say, the big daphnia filter very well, and they're just great prey for baby fish. So you have to manipulate the ecosystem to encourage these guys, which includes the presence of submerged aquatic vegetation, good deeper areas with oxygen so they can live. I'll miss that one. Finally, one thing you're not probably considering here, but this is another system to show you the range of things we have here. One of the methods is to filter algae out. You use something like a windmill, you suck out the surface scums, you put them through a wetland that you've built, 2 days later the water comes back without any algae. If you don't have many other choices, and some people don't, that's a method to think about. Of course, you need somewhere to put the wetland, you need some way to get the energy around, but it's another method that I will consider and either reject or accept before we move on to the final decision. This is a wetland that I proposed for Lake Elsinore, which is a very eutrophic reservoir in Southern California, where we thought we might use this method. In fact, we're probably going to use it in another reservoir in San Diego before we do it here. This is what it looked like. There'll be 17 methods. There'll be applicability. This is for Lake Elsinore in Southern California. I'll give you a table like this. Like I said, this is not a big deal. It's not a lot of work. It's just a formal presentation to make sure we have not missed anything and give you some idea of the ranges you have. And you'll see there's yeses and nos. You pick out the yeses. You come back with the yeses. I go to Paul and say, here's 4 yeses. He can take it to you and say, which yeses do we want? Or which combination of yeses do we want? Assuming that we want something like mixing or aeration, we'll come up with something like this. This is Upper San Leandro Reservoir in Oakland, my local reservoir, in fact, where we've got a number of systems. We've got a mixing system. We've also got a hyperlimnetic oxygenation system because it's a drinking water supply. And this gives you some idea of the scale of these things. These are some pipes going out. Here you can see, here's Mark Mobley, who's an expert in fact, in here he's adding fine bubbles of oxygen because the reservoir is deep enough to have oxygen in the bottom. And you can see here's his pipes going out. And this is an algae bloom that he's putting them across. Kind of similar to the algae blooms I saw when we went out last summer in Devil's Lake. What you got choices? If we assume we come to some kind of aeration oxygenation, I like oxygenation. You know, if the reservoir's not got any oxygen in the bottom, it's not very healthy. Why not just add oxygen? Oxygen's cheap. You can make it on site. You can buy it. It's $150 a ton. That's a lot of oxygen. So it's one method. But you can get oxygen if you do destratification. Destratification, as I mentioned, it's this cartoon here at the top here. You're just mixing the water around. You stir it up, and the oxygenated water at the top, which has oxygen in it mainly because algae grew there and made oxygen. Photosynthetic oxygen is what you're looking for. It gets stirred down to the bottom, and that's the answer. Instead of blowing off into the atmosphere, which is what it does normally in this normally stratified lake, you stir it down so you save that oxygen. You can do it with with air rather, as this one is, or you can do it with a propeller. Propellers are the most efficient system, but not many people like to use them. Water engineers can use them. We have some and used to have some in Hollywood reservoirs, which were closed reservoirs in Hollywood. They're very effective, but they're large, they require maintenance, and they're perhaps not the best choice for the average community. You can use compressed air to lift air up, oxygenate it, send it back down in a double tube system, which is what this Limnos system here at the bottom is. And I'll mention all these when I give you the report. You can just put oxygen at the bottom and let it dissolve. You can even dissolve oxygen in a thing called a space cone, where you have a cone, you sit at the bottom of the reservoir, you put in the nasty water, you add oxygen, you mix the two together in the cone, and out it comes, and it sits across the bottom. This is a very effective way. Unfortunately, you're not deep enough for it. Not really. You could do it, and that'll be a problem I'll have to wrestle with. But that's why we say oxygenation, aeration, mixing. We've got these 3 things that Paul and I seem to be coming back to all the time. This is an oxygen plume where you just put oxygen in the bottom. This wouldn't work for you because you're not shallow. You need 50 feet of water. You only have 20 at the best. So this won't work for you, but it would put oxygen in the bottom. And that would prevent this internal loading. Remember, you've got internal loading and external loading. Internal loading's big if there's no oxygen. This would get rid of that problem, but it's inefficient because the little bubbles go up too fast. They move about 32 centimeters a second, so they're gone in a very short amount of time. In a big reservoir, it's fine. If we use if we mix the oxygen together in this cone, this Spiess cone I mentioned, Dick Spiess is a professor, or former professor at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee. And I first met him in 1974, and he had these brilliant ideas which I've used. And you get a plume of this oxygenated water running across the bottom of the lake. And it'll work in shallow water too. So this is a possibility, even though we may not use this one. We had a few 100,000 fish die. And as you can imagine, this caused a deal of trouble in California. And I think they died because we had hydrogen sulfide generated in the bottom of the lake, though the reservoir was otherwise fairly good. But as I say, oxygen's cheap, and if we short oxygen, why don't we add oxygen? So we did, and this was a Spiess cone. This is actually a picture of a Spiess cone going in. And the scale is that here, you can see that's a guy in a hard hat. So this thing's pretty big, but it's a big reservoir. So you'll be talking about something, if we did it in this lake, that might be 10, 15 feet tall, something like that. And it would sit at the bottom of the reservoir and would put a layer of oxygenated water across the bottom. It would prevent internal loading, because that oxygen would go over the mud, and the bacteria in the mud would say, I'm happy, I'll just use the oxygen. I don't need to let phosphorus out. Stay in the bottom as ferric phosphate, which is an insoluble precipitate. The ammonia will come out, but it'll be nitrified, and some of that nitrate will go to nitrogen gas by denitrification and be lost. So it's a great method, and this is just to give you some idea. This is in Comanche Reservoir. You can see here is chlorophyll before at about, what number is that? 20 on average, and it's down here at about 2 or something. And here's Secchi depth water clarity, and before the system started here, before it was about, I think the average was about 5 feet, and now it's about 14 feet or something like that. Now, again, you may be too shallow for this option, but you may not, so it's a thing I have to wrestle with. If we go to perhaps what we're thinking about, destratification mixing. One advantage is everybody knows about it. There are these aeration systems everywhere, so we're not trying to tell somebody something new. So it's fairly safe. It's not going to be a disaster. We've got oxygen in the bottom water because we've got it stirred down. It's not as efficient, though. Remember, when you're pushing water down, it's not as efficient as when you've got the oxygen already in the bottom. So it's much less efficient than something like a Spiess cone. It'll reduce some odors because hydrogen sulfide doesn't like oxygen, so if there's any likelihood of odors, and these usually occur around the fall when the lake stirs around, they wouldn't occur. It reduces scum-forming blue-greens. The blue-greens that form scums, these big ones, you can see them, they're a green layer on the top. They look a bit like paint sometimes. But in fact, if you look at them under the microscope, they're like tiny peas. Lots of algae all scuffled together like that. And as I've mentioned, they like calm water. Once when I was a graduate student, I sailed from England at 51 north to the Antarctic at 64 south on a very slow boat. And it was very boring. So every day I would take out an algae sample from the ocean. When I started in England, southern England, they were diatoms mainly, these nice algae that fish like and zooplankton like. And as I got towards the tropics, they became blue-greens because it was stratified and warm. As I got down to the Antarctic, it reversed again. So that's the global concept that we're using, that these algae they like the stratified water because they can float. Not only can they float, they can actually sink as well. What happens with blue-greens, and perhaps I should divert to tell you how they survive this way. They float up because they've got little bubbles of gas in them. And when they get to the top, they form the scums. But if you've watched them, very often the scums aren't there in the afternoon. And what happens is they grow and they photosynthesize. And when you eat your breakfast, some of your breakfast you make as glycogen, and you put it into your liver, and that lasts you until lunchtime. Well, algae do the same thing. They make glycogen and put it, they don't have a liver, but they store it. But glycogen has a density of 1.3, and the density of water is 1. So they're heavy. So they come up, make some weight, and go down again. And then when they've used it up and grown new cells, they come back up again. It's genius. And they're 2 billion years old, Anyway, so we've got to deal with that. So it makes them more efficient, so we've got to get rid of that advantage. Now, what I'm proposing that we might use, the most likely thing that Paul and I have come up with, is this vigorous epimagnetic mixing. And what we're doing is essentially artificially creating a windy day. So suddenly, instead of this warm stratification with these little layers of water, you've probably done this if you're swimming in the lake. The top 18 inches is pretty warm, and then it's a bit cooler below, and then if you need to keep your beer cooler, you put it down even further. And those layers are sufficient to sink the good algae and allow the blue-greens to float up through them, because they can go through these layers of different warmth, which of course are different density. The ones on the top, warmest are the lightest, and they can go up and down these almost as they please. So you would then mix the lake, and this has not been very feasible until recently, because if you have a big lake like you do, 650 acres, mixing all that requires aerators and diffusers and mixers, propellers, whatever, wooden spoons, whatever you need, a lot of stuff. But this guy called Ken O'Hara invented a device which now allows us to put diffusers at any depth and have the same amount of air coming out of them. It's just a regulator. That's what he calls it. It indeed is a regulator. Otherwise, you have to calculate that you need a bit bigger hole here because it's deeper. Obviously, if you have a pipe with holes in it, for example, if the holes are all the same size, when it gets deeper, there'll be more pressure on each hole and it won't be so much air coming out. So you have to calculate, well, how much bigger a hole do I need? And where am I? That's not an easy calculation. And, you know, the holes might get blocked and things like this, so it's much better to go to modern diffusers. So we think that with this newish technology, you can reduce the number of pipes, and the cost of an aeration system is mostly pipe. If you have a lot of pipe, thousands of feet of pipe, at so much a foot, obviously it's a big cost for you. If you can reduce that, which you can with regulators, you will reduce the overall cost. So that's where this method that we primarily started out for places like Buckingham Palace and places in London that had shallow lakes with a lot of algae, they wanted them to look less scummy, has been developed, and we've used it in a few other places. Disadvantages? Well, I showed you the one where I added oxygen to the lake and we reduced the internal loading in Comanche Reservoir in California. The chlorophyll dropped. There's no reason to think that if you stir the blue-green algae that we don't want away, there'll still be light, there'll still be nutrients, so there'll still be algae. So if you have a chlorophyll standard, you either get it changed or you will not necessarily decrease it. If your lake was 30 feet deep, you probably would reduce everything. There are some lakes in Europe where we've used this technique and they've gone gin clear. But you don't have a lake that's 90 feet deep. So the disadvantages are that you'll still have the same amount of algae, which might not be so bad because the algae support the fish. So long as they're not causing you a nuisance, you don't have a drinking water supply, they're not clogging any filters, maybe that's a compromise you can live with. It requires a lot of pipes even so. So you'll have a bunch of pipes and the cost of pipes going through the reservoir because you've got to mix it all. Well, not all. You've got to mix a lot of it. And finally, you'll require energy to run the compressors. Now, compressors are pretty low energy systems, so that's not a big deal. It's a cost, it's a disadvantage, but it's a minor one. This is what happened in Cherry Creek. This is in Colorado. Downtown Denver was flooded a few times, so they built a flood control structure, 850 acres. Yeah, 50 acres. Shallowish, about 30 feet deep at the deepest. A lot of it's much shallower, of course. Used for flood control, but as you can see from the picture with the boats, it's very heavily used recreationally. And it had algae in it, and they wanted us to do something. So we put one of these systems in there, essentially an aeration mixing system. This one, we didn't put it down to the very bottom in the deepest parts. We put it in the shallower parts. We mixed most of the surface water. And to my amazement, the blue-green algae reduced from about 60% to 1%. This is before, over here on the left-hand side, 2006 and 7, and the orange part here is the blue-greens. Now, these weren't the big blue-greens that you see here. They were colonial blue-greens, but they weren't big nuisance ones. But they were worried that they would come, and that would really put a damper on their recreational industry. So we put this in to prevent the big blue-greens that you have here. But as you can see, all the blue-greens disappeared. As you can see, the orange, when we go into the right-hand side, sort of gone away. So it's a bit baffling to me that we didn't get some other kind of blue-greens that weren't a nuisance, but we didn't. And so that's some good data. Now, there are data from other places, but the Queen's not very keen on collecting samples. So We don't have any samples from Buckingham Palace, for example, to show you. But I think we could probably dig some up, if necessary. When I say vigorous epilimnetic mixing, it's only vigorous if you're an algae and about this big. You wouldn't see much difference. It's just that the bubbles of air would be closer together. You'd see some kind of distance. On a very calm day, you'd be able to see where the bubbles were. So it's not very vigorous from our point of view. Kids are not going to be spun around by it or anything like that, unfortunately. Okay, we've got watershed methods. I'm not going to go through all these. You know some of these. But basically, we have point sources, non-point sources, point sources of waste discharges. You got rid of yours in 1970, was it? You took out the waste discharges? Yeah, okay. Non-point sources, these are septic tanks, agriculture, rain, wind. Some of these I know you're dealing with. I know you're working on doing better things with your septic tanks. But it'll take a while for everything to flush out, even so. But I know you're doing that, and we should continue to do more. One of my other specialities is designing unit process wetlands where we can take something on the watershed and perhaps clean it up even more so it gets rid of more nutrients. Urban slobber. I don't know how much urban slobber you have here. This is a term from Southern California where people wash their cars every day, because they like clean, shiny cars, and it all goes down in the drain and into the river. I don't think you're quite that way, but you will have people washing their cars nearby with a phosphate-based detergent perhaps, or putting fertilizer onto their lawns and it getting washed off by the irrigation or by the next rain. Aeolian fallout. This is mostly a problem with nitrogen and toxicants like lead, and since you are fortunate enough to have most of your winds coming from the ocean, you're fine most of the time. Except you're going to get China, of course, but that's the problem we'll have to deal with over there. And then the insufficient water, which is urban land use problem, which is not particularly applicable here. You've had 100 years of lumbering, agriculture and homes. You've got nutrients. They've got into the lake. They're the legacy pollutants. If you look at, you've had studies done on the profiles of the sediments in the lake. You can see that, for example, quite unusually, the phosphorus didn't change very much over time. The nitrogen did, and other pollutants did. So you've got this much of legacy sediments, which are not good, sitting on the bottom, sending nutrients back up to you every summer. Now remember, it's actually, though there's this much of it, the actual point, it's only about this much that actually plays a real role. Stuff will seep up slowly, but most of what you see that comes out of the bottom fell down there in the spring and came out in the summer. So it's not as bad as you might think. You've still got septic tanks close to the lake, and you're not the only ones, of course. A lot of people have this. And I know you're trying to get rid of them, and that'll occur. And you don't have any wetlands to filter nutrients at the lake. Inflows, though, I know you have one or two wetlands that are on your streams coming in, but natural wetlands tend not to filter very well except in floods because the water just tends to pass by them at low water. So when I build them, I divert the water through the wetland all the year round. But those are your concerns, I think. That's it. And do you want HBH or do you want your questions now?
Should we ask questions now?
Yeah, sure.
Let's go ahead. Well, I had one question. I know our lake's really shallow and, average of a little over 8 feet. And do we really get that much stratification of temperatures in 8 feet where the VEM system or a mixing system will make a substantial difference?
Yes, you do, in fact. Even in Oregon, even with the winds, you get stratification. And remember, where it's going to be worst is where it's 16, 20 feet deep. Mm-hmm. So up on the top end there by, what's that point?
Standpoint.
Yeah, just from there down, where you're 15, 20 feet deep, you're getting stratification. You can get stratification in water that's this deep. Most of the energy that wind puts into a lake is that way. It doesn't mix so much down against gravity. So, yeah, you're getting enough stratification for the algae.
Another question I had was, as we look at if we were to put in a system, an aeration system, what are some of the potential problems that you might have with the equipment as it interfaces with the recreational user? We have a lot of recreational use on the lake during the summer months, and that's when it would be in operation. Are there a lot of problems that occur as those recreational users are going about using their lake and then get involved with the equipment at all, or is that a problem?
Well, it's not a problem, it's a concern, for sure. Obviously, some people, if they put their anchors down, are going to get their anchors caught under the pipes. It doesn't happen as often as you think, but the pipes are heavier than they think, too. So either they'll be strong enough and they'll lift the pipe up, and they'll be able to undo it. It doesn't seem to be much a problem as it might be, because one of the ways you maintain these things is you have them designed so they're light enough you can pull them up by hand on a small boat. Mm-hmm. I would think that people who were casting on the bottom would get some of their line caught around the diffusers, maybe. Of course, they could see the diffusers, too. The thing is that the fish like to hang around there. Mm-hmm. So where that diffuser edges, that's where the fish go. So the fishermen go there, too. So they might get their hooks caught in now and again. I doubt they could damage it, and I don't think there'd be much. We've not got much recorded problems, even in more used areas. One area in Wales, we have a whole bunch of these things, and it's heavily used by recreationalists, and there's not been a concern there.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, Dr. Horn, about just the difference in approach between destratification and destratification plus adding enough DO to the sediment base to get some results with nutrient loading. I thought I read in the Cherry Creek feasibility study that for destratification alone, you were recommending, I think, 20 times depth to be the distance,
Mm-hmm.
the spacing of the diffusers, and maybe something like 6 times depth for getting dissolved oxygen into the sediment, getting enough in there. But it also seemed to me that maybe the results of the diffused oxygen segment of the program increasing that we're not that successful. And so, knowing what you know about Devil's Lake, can you give us any ideas about, which might be the right way to jump? Well, that's all based on an assumption that a destratification system is going to be a lot cheaper than a destratification and dissolved oxygen program.
If I was doing the Cherry Creek program again, I think for various reasons I'd put 2 or 3 big aerators at the bottom, and then we'd completely destratify. We didn't actually destratify that lake. It's called destratification sometimes, but it's not a full destratification because we don't have aerators in the deepest part up by the dam. I've recently designed one that we installed in Mountain Lake in San Francisco, which is much smaller. It's only 5 acres, but it's very precious to San Franciscans. And there I put in some deeper aerators as well as the shallow ones. So if I might rephrase your question here, we've got one system where we could put some kind of actual pure oxygen device in that would, say, add lots of oxygen to everywhere under 10 feet in the lake. So you'd have those long arms, the 2 arms of the lake would be, well, not 2 arms, but 2 parts of the lake would be well oxygenated. If we went for destratification and mixing, you're correct. If we just went for destratification, we'd put them only in the deeper parts, and so it would be less. If we want to get rid of blue-greens, because blue-greens float around, as you probably know, they might be here and then they might be 2 kilometers away next day as the wind moves them around because they float, and especially if they're not too healthy, they'll keep on the surface. If we wanted to go for the vigorous epilimnetic mixing option, we would need a lot more aerators, a lot more pipe, and a lot more diffusers, and a lot more cost. So it's a fairly clear distinction. If you just go for destratification in the classic sense, in your deepest areas, put some diffusers in there, and cross your fingers. That might be enough. If you want to use vigorous epilimnetic mixing over a bigger area, especially some of the areas on the other arm where it's shallower but a lot more use, you would have more cost, and you would be destratifying shallower areas. So basically, if we think of it as deep destratification and shallow destratification, yes, there's a big difference. You could just go for one or both.
So I had pictured this as a system where you'd cover the whole lake, but the diffusers would be spread further apart, and that's what would make it cheaper if you're just aiming for destratification.
Yeah.
I got that wrong? I mean,
No, you haven't got that wrong. Obviously, if you've got a piece like this that's destratified with an aerator, the ideal design has the edge of that diffuser overlapping with the other diffuser. If we spread them out, you have to depend on the wind to sort of smear your aerator and assume that there's not enough blue-greens in between that are still going to come and cause you nuisances. So I think perhaps we need to rephrase it as sort of complete vigorous epilimnetic mixing or partial vigorous epilimnetic mixing, something like that. And there's an argument to be made both ways, for sure.
okay. No, thank you, I understand. I didn't get the part about that the edges wouldn't meet, and so you'd have this area where the cyanobacteria could all congregate and be happy.
In this lake, of course, because the southern part, the oceanside part, is so shallow, you'd probably be only treating half the lake anyway. That area where the macrophytes used to be, is it Regatta where you launched the boats there?
Yeah.
So the bit further south from Regatta where it gets really shallow, you can't use an aeration system that's 2 meters deep. It'd be totally inefficient. You just couldn't work it there. So you wouldn't be doing anything there, and you'd be relying on the fact that the algae weren't growing there and blowing back. But on the other parts, I think you're correct here. We just have, it's like you say, instead of every 6 sensors, we've got to 20 times the depth or something like that. And that's something I'm still wrestling with, or I would wrestle with again for you. But it's definitely an option. And I don't have enough cases to say which would be most effective.
I did read, and it seems to make good sense, Ken Wagner's admonition to overbuild, not underbuild.
Yeah, yeah, and Ken's a wise guy too. Yeah, and he's seen some of this data. Yeah. Well, I had a question from you about this. One can design, for a half-size system and then double it. For instance, the Comanche Reservoir system, which turned out to be very successful, was only built at half scale because that only cost about $1 million, and that was enough to satisfy the regulatory agencies that a fine had been imposed. The engineering design was for 2 of these, so we thought we'd run one and see what happened. If you designed it with a bit of thought about expansion, you could, in fact, design a system that was 1 scale and then, if necessary, perhaps, say, run another pipe and have a space for another compressor to be added later or something like that. That was something that came out of those questions you gave to me last night or a couple of days ago.
Yeah, that was my question. That was a follow-up to what I just asked you. So if you built it with that flexibility so that you could expand it later, is there going to be a lot of overlap in costs when you go to do the expansion, or are you just going to get the same unit value for your expansion costs as you did for the original costs?
I think that mostly depends on how you originally design it. If you design it with the thought of we can expand, I mean, the simple costs that are going to occur, like pouring a concrete pad. Pouring a concrete pad that's twice the size, that can take 2 compressors, for example. It wouldn't be twice the size, but that take 2 compressors, not 1. Only buying and installing 1. That's a definite cost savings, because then all you have to do is come in, bolt the new compressor down, and put the new line in. If you have to build a second pad and everything, you'd get incremental costs. So thinking about things like that is definitely something that would be an advantage cost-wise. If you decided, well, we'll have 1 pipe with some sidelines that would cover most things. If we needed to do some more, we'd run another one with alternate pipes. There are ways I think you could devise that would definitely say you double the size, not double the price. Yeah. But the only thing there is, as you know, one of the things that haunts aeration people is that most of the original aeration systems were undersized. People didn't understand the dynamics of the lake well enough, and so a lot of earlier aeration systems had to be yanked out because they weren't effective. And so engineers, I think, generally, that's the real engineers, we tend to overbuild a bit sometimes, right? Engineers are conservative, yeah. But I think we might go both ways.
And that's something you can kind of maybe think about and
Yeah, we'd go.
build in as a kind of an option in the design process.
That's why working with Paul's going to be good on that.
Great.
Several times you referred to sludge this deep. And in front of my dock, when I take a pipe, a 15-foot pipe, I have to screw another 15-foot pipe with my hands, one after the other, to get to where I hit something that I can't push down with my hands. What are you suggesting? So if you're thinking we only have this much sludge on the bottom, my concern is that there's more than that.
Yes, well,
And I'm not a scientist by any means, but just
sounds like science to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, common sense tells me that we need to get a lot of that stuff off of the bottom of the lake, and then we need to keep the nutrients from coming into the lake. And from your presentation, I'm just concerned that this system is not going to accomplish getting, in some instances. And I live on the south end of the lake where I get a lot of wind, and I'm sure a lot of the sediment blows in front of my place. But I don't know anywhere on the lake that you can hit solid ground this deep.
Well, two things here. One is the samples that you had the other people analyze were taken from the center of the lake. And that tends to be where stuff is winnowed in. But the chemical analysis is not analysis of sloppy material. It's only, they dated it. And so they've got 140 years in this much in the middle of the lake. So the lake may have always had some fairly sloppy stuff in it. It's just not high in nutrients.
Okay.
So
you're suggesting only this much of the top of it, and below that is just really watery?
it's just as it was, but it's watery, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably 90% water.
Yeah. Well, before you spent the kind of money you'd have to spend on dredging, you'd take a few more samples, obviously including one right in your dock.
Yeah.
But generally, that's what your studies say. 140 feet is about this much in the center of the lake, and the finds that are worse usually tend to get pushed down to the deepest part. From a navigation point of view, you might want to get rid of more. I'm quite a fan of dredging in many ways, but the costs are disposal of the sediment primarily. If you've got somewhere to put it, then the costs are quite low, and you can suck up 90% water with a machine. It's
Right.
pretty easy. In fact, you can suck up almost solid stuff now in modern machines.
Well, and you can, in the business that I'm in, I've seen the sludge sucked out, put in big bags, dewatered, and then you get rid of the dewatered sludge. And I would think that it's not like landfill sludge or leachate, but coming from the bottom of a lake, it shouldn't be too toxic to land apply.
No, given what you are, unless there's some problem with lead.
I mean, there's no industry here. There's very little farming.
Lead would be your only problem.
And
don't
I would
that'd
think
be a
it would
problem.
be, in fact, I know we can't sell it because it's not our stuff, but to an organic farmer, it seems like black gold to me. I mean, it's very high in nutrient. And I mean, you should be able to get rid of it somewhere. So I keep going back to, we just need to suck all this stuff off at the bottom of the lake, and then, I mean, honestly, and then an aeration system of some sort to keep it healthy and to keep what's coming in, because we're not going to stop what's coming in. We have 400 homes on the lake. We have, I mean, it's a bowl with mountains around, 60% of it. We're going to get a lot of stuff coming into the lake, and so we have to get the stuff on the bottom out and then deal with the stuff coming in.
Excuse me, but am I wrong? But, pardon my voice, but through an aeration system, if it's designed right, we also get depth, don't we?
Not much. You'll oxidize some of the carbon that's in there that didn't reduce, but you won't get much increase in depth. It'll be, few centimetres at most, so it's not a noticeable one. I, in fact, recommended dredging for this mountain lake I mentioned, and we did dredge. But I had $10 million for that 5-acre lake, because it's Nancy Pelosi's lake, so we had a lot of money. And we also had lead, so the transportation agency had to pay for it. From, you know, old cars from there's a freeway right by it.
Oh, okay.
You know, if you were saying you've got what, 30 feet deep there?
I would say it's easily 16 feet deep.
So 16 feet, that's 5 yards. So think of it in the lake itself, how many cubic yards you've got. And the cheapest you can do anything for
But
it.
that's not dewatered. I mean, if 90% of it's water, you
No,
end
but
up
to
with...
get it out, it's per cubic yard of in situ
To
stuff.
remove it?
Yeah, to remove
Okay,
it. So
but
you
that's
just-
not how much we're going to have.
Oh, no,
in-
you'd get less when it got out,
Okay.
especially if it was sludgy. And the usual dewatering way, and you could probably do that here, is you put it in a big tank and you let it settle. You can put it in bags, geobags, if you want. It's a bit more expensive, though.
Oh, really?
And the nutrients that come out you usually treat or put somewhere else, you know, let them go out into the sea or something like that. The big cost is, it's the cheapest, if you take a number of something like $5 a cubic yard to take it out, and roughly $10 to get rid of it somewhere, if you have to truck it anywhere. If you can put it somewhere where you can spread it, or get it to farmers, or get them to even take it for free, then that cuts your costs down a lot. And if there's any way to work out any removal of sediments, I'm afraid I wouldn't take it from around your dock necessarily. I'd take it from the deepest part if I got the choice. But, you know, it might be an advantage to take it around the docks. Since this is a public lake, there are federal grants that allow you to, that support the removal of, you know, it's navigational acts and that kind of stuff. You can't do it with private lakes, but you can with public. And envisaging what's going to come out of my 17 methods analysis, I'll say it'd be a good thing if you could do it, but with a lake this size, you'd have to be restrictive on what you did.
So, and that was my only other question is, you said you're going to give us a list of yeses. Will you be attaching approximate cost to those yeses?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure how close I can get in some ways, but there'll certainly be, you know, like feasible, infeasible.
Sounds like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars would be close enough.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these things, see, dredging, for example, it's $250,000 to set up. You got to get the guy from wherever it is to come with his gear. You know, there's big barges and all this stuff. So you've got a fixed cost up front.
We have a guy with a barge.
Halfway there, all right.
And a pump.
Yep. Yeah. But, I mean, dredging will be, I mean, the final decision, but it's likely to be an option that I'll say is too expensive for you.
Okay.
But I'll talk with Paul a bit more about whether it's feasible to think about it in the deepest areas that might go anoxic.
And when you talk about the yeses and the feasibilities, and you're taking into consideration possibilities of permitting, because ever since I've been involved with the lake, I always hear, oh, you'll never get a permit for that. You'll never get a permit for this. You'll never get a permit for that. And so it's kind of discouraging, because I hear things and it's like, oh, that's a great idea, and then, oh, you'll never get a permit for that.
Yeah. Permitting is a problem. But if your idea is to improve conditions for the fish, that makes the permitting a lot easier. And in this case, everything that we'll think about doing will benefit the fish. I don't think there's any of the methods, well, no, copper sulfate.
Copper.
Yeah.
Scratch that
Though
one
it
off.
might, in a way, it might because it gets down the blue-greens, which they don't like in things. But basically, most of the methods that we'll come up with would be beneficial to the fish. There's low oxygen in this lake. If we increase the oxygen, the fish passages would be easier for the fish. If we got more zooplankton, it would be healthier for the fish. The baby fish would eat more of these and that kind of thing. So it might help with permitting, but a lot of permitting I've found is just whether you can negotiate with them.
Navigate, yeah.
Yeah, whether you get on the right foot with them to start with.
Yeah.
And some people will negotiate easily, others less so. For instance, I've had troubles in California in the When I put my first aeration system in, which was a big system back in 1976, I had problems with, they thought the fish wouldn't like the bubbles. And so it took us a long time to get over that one. If you think about fish in an aquarium, they actually don't mind bubbles, but...
Another question, Dr. Horn. You said that in all likelihood, or the possibility is that we aren't going to, through an aeration system, a type of aeration system, we aren't going to reduce the overall algae. How fast are we going to see a change in the plant life? Because currently we don't have hardly any macrophytes, larger plant life. How fast do we expect to see something, our lake transformed?
Well, you should see something in the algae, the nuisance blue-green algae, within a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't have any effect on the macrophytes. They're controlled so far by the grass carp. And as they die out, they're going to grow back up again. And I wouldn't mind seeing a few more of those. I mean, I think you probably got too many grass carp in here at one time. Because some aquatic macrophytes are good.
Mm-hmm.
Too many not, of course. That's
right.
The problem. Yeah. So those that wouldn't affect. But you should see an effect within the first 2 years.
Well, once the grass carp die out and we see the weeds start to come back, are we likely to get any benefit from the aeration system in terms of controlling macrophyte growth?
They will not have any effect on macrophytes. They're just too big to be handled by aeration systems. I hope you'll be able to get your permit and put a few more grass carp back in again to keep them down at the right level you need. The biomanipulation method I suggested, it does well. If you've got some macrophytes, their roots stabilize the sediment so it doesn't get stirred up so much by the wind. Algae will grow on the stems of the macrophytes, and they compete effectively with the blue-greens, because the ones that grow like a little scum on the macrophytes, they're more efficient than the blue-greens. So they take the nutrients rather than the blue-greens. If any blue-greens blow into a patch of macrophytes, they usually never get out again. So macrophytes in general can be quite useful to you, but not if there are too many and get in the way of your navigation. And then you're stuck with harvesting then, which is not a good option. But aeration will not affect them one way or the other. Because, they're taking a lot of their nutrients out from their roots, not through the leaves.
My question is, seems that our concentrated problem is in the fall for approximately 90 days, give or take 30 or 60 days. How beneficial is it for us to have this aeration system? Would it be able to run only during the peak months, or would it run all year long? The expense to me is, or the expense to the district is it a 24/7 operation, or is it something that we can modify with the time? So.
I think you'd run the system starting a month before when you expected to get the algae, for example, and you'd stop it probably in November. So it would, and you'd probably run it 24/7 during that time. But you could then experiment with not running it so much, and you could run it at, say, off-peak hours and this kind of stuff. These big aeration systems we have in Southern California, we tend to run them in the darker periods. The problem is the main stratification is in mid-afternoon, and that's when your highest electricity costs are. So you might have to run it through part of that time. But I think you'd probably finish up, if it's like the other ones I've experienced with, you'd run it for several months, the worst months of the year, and you'd run it for probably 12, 16 hours, something like that.
What about the maintenance part of that, as you clean the aerators and stuff? Do you need to do that during the periods of operation, or do you need to do it can you do it outside?
The operation maintenance is the compressors, and you have to change the oil every so often, and the filters.
Right.
But that's standard stuff that you do with every compressor. In the lake, It's normally recommended that you pull them up and get a brush and scrub them. And they're this size. They're 8 inches or 12 inches across. And you have a rubber membrane on top with little holes in. So it waggles all the time, so scum doesn't build up on them.
I see.
So most people do it about every 5 years.
I see.
Right? It's not that big an operation. But you could have a few hundred of these, so you'd have to go out and brush them off every so often. But it's not a big deal. And in terms of reliability, there's nothing much there. It's just, a pipe. These things, lie on the bottom. They're plastic about this big. They're self-sinking, so they're heavy. Not too heavy, but they're heavy. And then you probably have a little stand about a foot high. The diffuser sits on top, and that's it. There's not really much to go wrong there, fortunately.
Good.
Things like the Comanche oxygenation system, it's been running for 20 years with only one problem where it is short on the motors. So these things seem to be pretty reliable.
Why not put them right on the bottom instead of a foot above the bottom? Is that, when you get...
One's political. People think sediment's stirred up a lot, which it is for the first few minutes, and then it settles out. They tend to fill in a bit, and they tend to sink a bit sometimes. The pipe tends to sink into the mud a bit, and you'll get a bit of, this much mud every year. So it's just to make sure they're clear themselves and don't get clogged with junk around them. The foot is just what people talk about. You could probably put 3 inches or 6 inches, but everybody seems to use a foot. In places where they're very bothered, they use 6 feet. Of course, that would be no use for you. But I've done a big analysis on the effect of stirring, and there isn't any. There's already sediment on the bottom, just above the bottom. The dead junk is still sort of fluffy stuff's on the top, and that gets mixed around a bit more. So the actual bottom water gets cleaner than it was before, on average. So I think I'd go with a foot. That's what everybody seems to be using.
Okay, yeah, if you've done a study on it already, that's great.
Yeah.
That's what we need to know.
I didn't do a study to say whether it's 9 inches or a foot, though. That's something that I haven't done. So we could think about it.
Any other board questions? Are there any questions from the audience at this time? Yes. Could you speak up, please?
Just maybe repeat the question. Compressor noise is the
Thank
question.
Yeah, I'll have to turn this way to answer. Okay. There is compressor noise. What you normally do is you put them in a baffled shed, and most people can't hear them, but noise is a funny thing, and some people can hear noise a long way that nobody else can hear, or it irritates them in a way it doesn't irritate other people. These compressors are small, and you can baffle them. Yeah. It costs about, the baffled cabinet is more expensive than the non-baffled, and you have to have, a place to let the air in to cool them, of course. But we put a set of these in the Hollywood reservoirs, and there are some very expensive people live around these compressors. And that was a major concern, and we were able to overcome it. So I think, the one likely site is that Sand Point, and there are some houses nearby there. I think you could make it so they couldn't hear it, but you can't absolutely guarantee that.
Other questions? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Any value of flushing the lake out, putting it in a different type of dam, deeper, at the bridge, I think the escape any value of making a deeper exit to the lake, getting some of this water out in the winter, breathing it does, so it goes back to fresh water, clean water?
So the question is there value of effectively dredging the Dee River to a significant depth to, allow
The
the,
dam could actually open up.
It-
Let some blue green out.
and then it would open up and let the water out? That's kind of the crux of the question.
You remember the blue-greens are floating on the top, so they're already going out to what extent they are. And unless you could get it deep enough for a channel to get the sediment out, you wouldn't get much advantage. The nutrients in the lake probably often less than they are in the incoming streams, because the algae's taken them out. So flushing the lake always seems to be a good thing, but only if you're flushing it with really clean water, and you don't have really clean water. The water is it's okay, but it's not really clean. And with the stuff on the bottom, it would get unclean pretty quickly. So, though it sounds like a good idea, it probably wouldn't work very well.
Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up clarification? And again, pretty elementary. I think I understood what you said, that the de-stratification and mixing will help reduce the blue-green algae and deal with our nutrient load that is existing in the lake. What I didn't hear is that if we will, with the external loading that we have, if we will ever get back to level with just that fix.
Yeah. The reason for going with the aeration mixing is that I don't think with this kind of lake and many others that you can really get the nutrients back down to low enough levels. So the system we're talking about, which is a sort of hybrid standard aeration come vigorous epilimnitic mixing, would deal with nutrient flux from the sediments, but it wouldn't deal with nutrient flux from the rain. But you don't have all that much rain in the summer, so you're not getting that much coming in. But remember, the shallow water is full of little midge larvae and things in the bottom, and they're all excreting too, so that even the shallow sediments are producing nutrients too. Mm-hmm. And that's legacy sediments again. So you'll never get back to, well, I shouldn't say never, but it'll be a long time to get back to, say, 100 years ago in terms of nutrient concentrations. So this allows you to get rid of your main problem, the scummy blue-greens, without completely getting rid of the nutrients. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, yes. I guess my concern is that we go spend X number of dollars to put the system in the bottom of the lake and we see improvements, but because of the makeup of our lake with all the homes and the bowl, that it's improved, but it didn't really fix anything. And to the average lake user,
Didn't see any difference.
we just spent $1 million and I don't really see an improvement in the lake.
Yeah, that's of course the big question. Will you see an improvement? One thing that you could think about hope is that one of the ways to say what should the lake really be like is to measure the ratio of the area of the lake to the area of the drainage basin. And yours is quite small. You have quite a low ratio. There isn't that much drainage for the lake. So that would suggest to me that this water should be fairly clear. And so it gives me hope that we can restore it much more easily than we could, for example, if you were a reservoir with an enormous drainage basin that you keep putting stuff in.
Okay.
Steve, another question from the audience.
So, piggyback on what Tina was saying, so do you have any idea, because it's, if we spend the money as a district to control the problem, and it's truly a control, doesn't give us any guarantees for future. My question to you is, beyond the original expenditure, what could the district expect to pay in future to keep up with the maintenance of the lake?
Paul, do you want to repeat that?
I can try. So I think the question is long-term costs associated with not just the capital of this one-time infusion, but the long-term costs for...
Of keeping up with the external loading.
The external loading is always going to be a variable.
So costs associated with keeping up with external loading. So sewer, potentially. Is that, that kind of, it would be one of the external, is that the question?
I think we're talking about Devil's Lake Water Improvement District costs. Not.
I'm talking about the cost of the district.
Yeah.
To say, okay, we've had some changes in the lake,
Of what we do in water.
in the water. We need to reanalyze. We need to end up making these changes
Okay, so more of those 17.
That in
Right, what do we add on top of the destratification and mixing in the future to keep up with the external loading? If we have 1,000 more homes built within our our watershed, or even 200 more homes, or
You
more?
have two things that you can do here, and one you're obviously doing, which is trying to take individual wastewater loads to a treatment plant. And you were mentioning the system of maybe going round, it hasn't started yet, of taking the septic tanks by the lake and putting them into some kind of sewer, some kind of lift pump or something like that. That will be a long-term cost that you wouldn't bear. I don't think you probably don't bear that. The owners would bear that one.
I think we're talking about like in-water fixes, like
Yeah.
alum or, one of the other 17 things.
Yeah.
But I think you're saying reducing external loading will reduce our
Yeah.
in-lake costs.
Well, I mean, that's just-
The two go together.
Yeah, that's right. And some of that is regulation. I mean, in California, we sometimes go to extreme lengths, like at Tahoe. We take out 6 homes somewhere 2 miles down the road, and they'll be sewered. That's more a political thing, I think, than an actual thing, though you can calculate the numbers, of course. But in terms of the 17 methods, on the watershed, some of it is to do with regulations. I mean, you can say, people, for instance, one of the first things done in lake treatments was the reduction of phosphorus in detergents. That was a great thing, and it worked very well. You can, for instance, discourage the use of heavy fertilizers on the lakes themselves, lawns around the lake. Tahoe spends a lot of time on that kind of thing, for example. There's not much you can do about the ducks. They're going to come and do their business anyway. You might be able to do something in the watershed. We talked about the streams. There aren't really many streams that have much flow in the summer that have many nutrients.
No, the flows are pretty minimal in the summertime, yeah.
Yeah, and the other streams, a lot of it's going to be washed through anyway. So you don't have as big a problem as some people do. So in terms of future, in terms of costs, of course, you've got to pay for the compressors, the electricity for the compressors, and you were talking about how you could reduce that price, and that's sensible. It is possible, for example, to add oxygen to a compressor line so that you do a bit of oxygenation as well as aeration, though, of course, the bubbles are rising, so it's not as efficient as some other methods. I'm sort of torn in many ways because I like putting a layer of oxygen down the bottom. I like this layer of water that's rich in oxygen in the deepest parts, but the lake is just not very big where the deepest parts are, and you've got a lot of shallow areas that are producing nutrients for the algae too. If one went to a phased system, which you mentioned and you've mentioned to me too, then that would be one thing you could do. You see what your limits were, see what your numbers were, and then if you wanted to go ahead on more, or maybe the minor part was enough. The aeration, classical aeration, so to speak, alone might have been enough for you. There's just too many nutrients in the lake now for most of the other methods to work, and the methods to get rid of them are limited. There's things like alum, which only get rid of get rid of the phosphorus, and if you look at the phosphorus in the sediments, it hasn't increased. The nitrogen has, but the phosphorus hasn't. You've done a lot that you can do to reduce nutrients, and you've got this legacy problem at the bottom that you're not dealing with. This should do something to it. It should make a good difference to the amount of nutrient flux. If we can get that oxygen on the bottom, which is now 0, up to as little as 2 milligrams per liter, that will essentially prevent most of the phosphorus coming out of the sediments. And it will substantially reduce the nitrogen too. So that's the big goal here, technically, I think. And that's doable.
But I think that didn't happen in Cherry Creek, though, right?
No, we didn't put any in the bottom there.
Oh, that's right.
This was strictly a one to mix the surface
You
water.
could redesign Cherry Creek.
Yeah, they are redesigning it right now, and I've talked to them about that too. I think originally the project had some in the deeper water, but they were taken out for a reason, Consultants only have certain control, and then things go off in other channels.
Thank you.
Is Cherry Creek still in operation today?
Did you tell me they stopped last year?
Yeah, they stopped it in 2014 for, originally because of, you were talking about housing the aerator, or the compressors for noise. They did that, and it gets 115 degrees there. And those things were overheating, and so they were having some problems with that. And so they took it offline for a season, and also then they felt like they could take advantage of trying to assess other components about like the cyanobacteria and such. So then they made a decision to hold off on last summer too. So, but now, if you follow their meeting minutes, they're having those same discussions about 2016. So, and what I heard from the consultant is that, well, he can't say because he doesn't know. It's the board's decision, you know. But that was like what I understood to be the reason for taking it off is it was overheating, and they had issues with that because it was designed to be outside, and then they had to close it in for noise. And so they were running AC units inside effectively to try to keep that motor, and it was still overheating at 115 degrees.
Cost of their system is somewhere in our,
I think it was like $1 million, like 900 and something.
970,000, something like that.
Yeah.
When they built it, you mean? The construction cost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
not as big a footprint, smaller footprint than what's Devil's Lake, but
Were there any results for Cherry Creek for cyanobacteria when they shut it off versus?
yeah, they had, well, apparently there's some confusion right now, and I've just got an email earlier today suggesting there may be more confusion as to what the data say, because they had a different yeah, basically lab. I was trying to think of the name of the entity that was doing the analysis. And so there was confusion as to how measurements from, say, 2006 would have been comparable to, say, 2014. What they did show between 2013 and 2014 was that cyanobacteria increased after they shut them off, the type of cyanobacteria that you don't want. Of course, you still had these blue-green, or these green events. The pigment was still increasing because they're just, everything's still growing, but they, from what I was reading, the cyanobacteria from 2013 to 2014 had decreased, had increased, excuse me, kind of what you would expect. The blue-greens are available to do their thing, and they're doing it.
Cherry Creek's a very controversial lake. They spent a lot of money over the years, and there's also a fishery there, a wiper fishery, which was affected somewhat by the aeration, and whether it was good or bad, I don't know. So there's a fisheries concern that plays a lot of, because it's all artificial, so they don't have fish like you have running through. So there's a number of factors going on there, and I'm not in the inner loop at the moment on that one.
speaking of fish like we have, endangered coho, have you ever dealt with, or been successful in the state of Oregon with putting one of these systems into an endangered habitat?
No, I put one in Oregon, but I can go back to my oxygenation system where I've got the number of Chinook from 3,000 to 12,000, and I've got steelhead from 0 to 200 coming in to breed each year. Now, that wasn't only the oxygenation system, but without it, they couldn't have come back. So I think you can start off with that's a big advantage. And there's no real difference between the aeration system and the oxygenation system in that sense. So I think we've got a positive that you could present up for us. But yeah, I mean, I think the coho needs all the help it can get, and I think this would definitely be a help.
Obviously. But I was curious as to, with all of your installations, that if you had encountered the state of Oregon.
I have, but the fisheries I've dealt with have been the ones in up the Klamath Lake, where there's no controversy at all, of course. It's all smooth sailing.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back. The woman, yes. Could you speak up, please?
I have a question about estimated cost per compressor, to run. I haven't heard any figures on what it costs to run those. And then also, is is it possible to do a dual system where it'd be some electricity and some solar? Or is that too much demand for solar?
So the question is costs of compressor operation, and maybe this is an opportunity for the engineers to come up too. I don't know. They've been sitting so quietly in the back there.
It's for them.
Yeah, so,
Want to take another question, and then we can...
Mark, did you have a question
Come right
before
back to
we
that then.
get HBH up here?
Power plant is mobile across the water and able to lift 12 centimeters of sludge up to the water column during a hydraulic event. Would that help unload the lake?
Any way that you could get rid of sediment would help, but I haven't heard of that particular concept.
What you do is create the turbidity. You take the sludge, bring it up to the center water column, and let the hydraulics take it out to the neighbor.
Yes, and that would work, and I've been trying to do this in Oakland for years. I can't get the downstream people, in this case, fish people.
But we got the neighbor, he's cool.
Well, thank you.
okay, so that question was about like bringing sludge to the surface and allowing it to go out to sea. And yeah, I mean, that would effectively do that, but the concern would be fish and wildlife, and I think was what the answer was.
Could take offense to that, given my age, but
We all could.
So do you want to just introduce yourself, Mike, and give us 2 minutes or 10 minutes, and then, or even jump into that other question?
I'll try to be rather brief. I'm Mike Henry. I'm the president of HBH Consulting Engineers.
And I am Andre Chernishaw with HBH Consulting Engineers, a partner.
I'll jump into the question. Unfortunately, until we actually get into some design of the larger bubble system, I really don't know what the size of the aerator or the cost is going to be. But that's something certainly we could bring back fairly, in a preliminary state, early in the design stage. We haven't done any design yet, so I really don't. I apologize, but I don't have an answer to your question right now. I'd like to start out maybe by introducing HBH. I know I haven't met any of you people, and you haven't met us, and would just spend about 3 or 4 minutes telling you a little bit about HBH. We formed about 19 years ago. My son and I and another gentleman started HBH. My background had been spending 7 years with CH2M Hill and pretty much being an expert in sewage design, sewage systems and treatment. My son Rob had started developing an expertise in water. And the other gentleman who was with us was a development-type engineer. Mr. Boatman has since left the firm when the downturn in the economy hit. But HBH's mainstay really is municipal engineering. We do a lot of work for small municipalities. I think we've got, Andre could speak to this, but I think we got 3 or 4 projects that we're working with the city of Lincoln City with at this point. Most of our work tends to be on the coast, so we do consider ourselves coastal engineers. We're presently city engineers for the city of Rockaway, Oceanside Water District. We're doing work for Manzanita. We're doing a large drainage facility for Tillamook County, just the other side of town, where we're trying to reduce floods there by about 1 foot during the flooding periods. That's a very large project. We work for Manzanita. We work for Beaver Water District. Rob Henry, who is the other owner in the company, is a circuit rider for the state of Oregon Health Division, and if you have a regulatory issue with your water, we get called in to take care of it. We spend a lot of time dealing with some of the questions. You had asked a question about whether he had ever Dr. Horn had ever put one of these systems in where there's coho salmon. Probably not, but we have had a lot of experience working with NOAA fisheries.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, just keep it easy, what would you say the number would be of the success of something like this, if you had to just pick one out of the sky?
Well, I think if 1 was an absolute no from the regulatory agencies, and 10 was open their arms and, yeah, please, come on in, and let's talk about doing this. I would probably give this project maybe a 4 or 5. I think it's certainly permittable. There's going to be some hoops that are going to have to be jumped through. We're putting a piping system that's full of air in a major fishery area. So it not only affects the smolting salmon that come through, it affects the run of salmon from the standpoint that's simply an object that's at the bottom of the lake that's there. And I think that's how NOAA Fisheries is going to look at it.
So in the
Sorry, don't most of the salmon go up Rock Creek? Do they go
majority
up
of
Thompson
them,
Creek much?
Yeah, but they use the lake throughout the year for,
Well, I know that we have resident ones, but as far as running salmon, it seems like most of them go up Rock Creek, which, from what I heard earlier from Dr. Horn, we wouldn't have much aeration between Rock Creek and the ocean anyhow.
Right, but if salmon comes into the bottom of water, a body of water, we will have to deal with NOAA.
Okay.
Or if there's any potential of it, it's going
Yes.
to be looked at.
So Fish and Wildlife, NOAA Fisheries, they're going to be involved in the project, in the permitting process. There's just no way
just
around
the state
it.
of Oregon itself too, with a land lease.
I think the state of Oregon, DEQ is going to be involved. To some extent, you are moving some sediment on the bottom, and there was some question about, removing sediment. We've got a unique situation in the fact that we do have septic tanks surrounding the lake, or have had in the past, and so we do have sewage that has seeped into the lakes from time to time.
Mostly from the city.
What's that?
Mostly from the city.
Mostly from the...
Not the septic tanks.
We work for the city, I'm not going to answer that one, but...
It's improving, but...
So I think DEQ, if you went to move the sludge out of the bottom of the lake, DEQ would become involved, and you'd have to do testing to show whether the sludge was inert or not, if it was at the bottom, and that would then determine how much drying and windrowing you had to do with it to land apply it. I don't know if anybody has any questions concerning HBH. We were brought on by Dr. Horn because we have experience in Oregon in doing air systems, be it our experiences in lagoons. I believe, that the only fine air bubbler systems that's been installed in the state of Oregon in lagoon systems, and we've done 3 of them. All 3, I will say, have been very successful. We've reduced, Junction City is our latest client that we put an air system in, and their previous estimates were about $34 million to solve their sewage problem. It looks like we're well on the way of solving their problem for around $8 to $10 million. The air system was the first step, and it reduced BOD and suspended solids from what were interim limits of 50 down to 17, which is below the normal limits of discharge. So the city's very happy with that system, and so is Willamine and Amity, where we put
Is this aeration in their sediment ponds?
These are aerations in their sewage treatment plants, yes. And you say, well, is that the same as a horsehair bubbler system? Yes, it really is. I mean, the equipment's really the same except for the diffuser itself.
Mm-hmm. The tiny hole at the bottom is really the only difference. You got the same piping, the blowers, the same setup. It's just the hole is slightly different, where it allows a bigger bubble or a smaller bubble to exit the diffuser.
Now, each of the bubbles have a different function, obviously.
So I was thinking that these were like jets. That were, I thought that these were like like a hot tub jet that were big like this. The
bubbles.
You're talking about little, like a soaker hose type.
No.
The bigger the soak hose, the smaller the jacuzzi jet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can see them when they reach the top, but they spread out, of course.
Whereas,
So it's a hose that is perforated along the way, depending on the depth, the size of the hole, and,
The pipe is a pipe. It has these little risers screwed into it. And then on top of that is a diffuser that is, say, 8 inches across.
Okay.
With a little rubber top that lets the bubbles through. So that's a bit like the diffuser jet.
okay.
Right.
The broader ones, not the jets.
So there's no holes in the pipe that go out to the
no,
diffuser?
ma'am.
Not in this case.
Thank you.
Not in this case,
There
no.
are aerator systems that in lakes that have holes in them, but this is not one of them.
Right. Neither in this one or in the fine air bubbler system, they both operate pretty much the same. They have a diffuser that, one allows a whole bunch of little bubbles to come up in a column, and it spreads out as it comes up and provides oxygen to the full stratus of the lagoon. Where the large air, if I understand it correctly, Dr. Horn, comes up and then breaks at the top.
Okay.
One's to get oxygen in, and the other one's to mix.
So, and that's what we're talking about, is that the pipe would come up a foot off of the bottom, and then the mixing would begin at that level instead of mixing at the bottom?
That's correct.
Okay,
In principle, you could actually do it with a jet,
right,
but because you then train water the same way, but it's cheaper and easier to do it with an air pump.
okay.
So any questions for HPH at this point? We're pretty comfortable with the design of the system. It's very, very similar to what we've been designing. And same materials, same piping materials. The diffuser's a little different, but, we'll have to take a look at how it connects to the piping. That's about the only difference in the design of the two systems. We've done...
Similar onshore structures too.
What's that?
Similar onshore structures.
Were you going to answer the question we sent to you earlier about basically amounts to getting our bid under the $100,000?
Yes.
And we're thinking that where that can be done is in the area of the permitting services, with maybe our manager taking the lead on that, and you maybe providing permitting support services if he needs them.
Okay. Yeah, let me speak to that a second. We took a good hard look at that today, and what we're going to suggest is that we keep the level of assistance as far as the permit is concerned, the drawings and the calculations for volumes and so on and so forth, and we exchange the 5 meetings, which would come out to about 25 hours of time. In exchange, we'll provide the bidding services, and we'll get that back to Paul in a proposal.
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, exchange the what?
What we would do is, in the permitting, we actually said we'd go to 5 meetings.
Oh, 5 meetings. Okay, sorry, I
so,
just misunderstood what you said.
what
Thought you
we're
said
suggesting
meetings.
is we'll eliminate the meetings, and in turn, we'll provide for the bidding services. Bidding services, I think we had at $5,400. The 5 services would run about $3,400, but we figured we'd just make a unilateral switch between the two, if that's okay with the district. Paul's probably the one that's most affected on that. But so basically, we wouldn't be sitting beside you at the meetings if you had them.
Right.
We would be available by telephone, teleconference, if you had questions during the meeting process.
Just doing the math in my head, I'm not sure that gets us quite down to 100,000 though.
Yeah, we would stay, that would actually keep us at unless you were over, that would keep us at the same amount that we were at. We'd add in the 5,400 in inspection services, or in bidding
Bid
services,
assistance?
and we take 5,400 off of the cost of the permitting.
So you would go back basically to your June 16th proposal and just reduce the permitting services by $5,400?
Yeah. I believe that's the case.
So we would have all 7 tasks instead
Yes.
of 6 tasks as proposed in the July 8th proposal.
So I have a question. I mean, theoretically, they're 2 separate contracts, aren't they? 2 different awards? If
I
they're
would think so.
Individually.
But I don't know if we can get Dr. Horn without them.
Well, currently, we've provided a separate agreement to Paul directly, and I believe Dr. Horn has his own separate agreement with
Yeah.
Paul.
They're 2 different proposals.
So we could hire them separately, one or both.
Well, what we've been trying to do as a direct hire is come up with, this proposal that we can take to a bidding, to get out to bid. And really, we need the support of both entities. Dr.
But
Horn.
it's not a one.
Well, the total, though, is a one thing, because we've gone out looking for basically
What
this
the
scope.
total of them can provide
And
us.
so what we're looking to do, and the reason, and that we have 2 basically kind of proposals is they, as I understand, would bill us directly for their services, and then and Dr. Horn wouldn't have to handle that paperwork and
Sure.
add cost to him, which would then be added cost to you. So that was kind of an agreement that they kind of worked out in advance, I understand, and that way we'd save the district money overall. Because Dr. Horn would have overhead if he had to, get a bill from them and make sure it got paid, and they wanted to get paid regardless if Dr. Horn got paid, kind of thing, that kind of thing. So it's kind of working in tangent. But overall, we have that $100,000 threshold that we can't
So we're
exceed for.
16,000 over budget.
I believe the proposal that we provided in the last proposal, I think that was in July 8th, was just under 100,000.
77.
Yeah, for
Well,
77.
yours was 77.5, and Dr. Horn is,
Yes, we got 99.5 from, which is like a combined one.
So our total wouldn't change. We would just take 5,400 from the permitting, from the July proposal, and subtract that number by 5,400 and add a task 7 for bidding services,
Right.
and that would be at 5,400. So the number wouldn't
So what does that make your total proposal then?
Ours would be
99.5.
77.5.
so 99.5, Dr. Horn and you combined.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I don't, and we don't mind doing that. I will tell you that we have several jurisdictions, including the one we're setting in here, that, we do at times, the sub, or not the sub, but the surveyor or the geotech have separate contracts from HBH. And to my knowledge, nobody's ever had a problem with the state of Oregon in contracting that way. But, if that's the way the board wants to go, we're more than happy to accommodate you, and we'll stay at that 99.5 combined.
Well, we want it for as cheap as we can get it, obviously. Not going to lie there. And as far as whether it's, a sub or something, I'm going off of Paul saying that
That's fine.
if we have to stay under that because of what we put out there in a scope, then I have to trust that he's accurate.
We don't have a problem with
I'm not
that.
saying you're not accurate. I
That's
just
fine.
don't know myself.
And I'm not saying he's not accurate. I don't think that the Attorney General has yet weighed in on that question. I know there's a lot of jurisdictions that go one way, and there's a lot of jurisdictions going the other way, and nobody seems to be answering the question.
We don't want him to decide to weigh in on our question.
Yeah, it would be just our luck.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Question from the audience, Mark? Can you speak?
5%
So the question is a rigid pipe or a clay-based pipe?
It'll be, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
Probably high-density plastic.
Huh?
Probably high-density plastic.
Yeah. It'll be a PVC pipe, and it'll be weighted to hold it down to the bottom.
HDPE.
No, it'll be heavy. If you get them so they're heavy enough that they sink. It's a self-weighting pipe,
Well, you
but it's
don't use the
flexible.
clay pipe that they use variation systems in.
No.
No.
Okay, is there a reason why?
Well, one is, it's nice to be able to pull them up to service.
Well, you can still pull them up on that, they're a hose. The clay-based hose goes down. Most variation systems in place. And East Industries out of Colorado, you should know that. You ever heard of that?
I know the key industry, but I don't think they're out of there.
They're out of Colorado. Yeah, but
So the question was, clay-based or rigid? And the answer was not rigid, flexible,
Yeah,
but probably
it's not a
PVC.
rigid, it's a flexible pipe. No,
so when you pull it up, it'll pull up like that.
no,
It'll pull up like this.
it'll pull up, no, it'll
Right?
be,
So you're gonna pull you're gonna pull the fuse and flip it. So when you pull it up.
Depends how far the diffusers are apart, of course.
Yeah.
But usually with most, the usual length, you're in the boat, you pull it up, you get the diffuser, it goes down like that, but you're not pulling the other ones up, because one person's got to be able to pull them off.
So when you pull 20 feet of line, and you have one diffuser, the diffuser's going to be 20 feet apart. Is that what you're saying?
What's the problem with another
You're
diffuser?
going to pull another diffuser.
Oh, it might be.
They'll be 200 feet apart or something like that.
Okay, that's where you're saying 200 feet apart.
Something like 10, 15 times the depth apart.
And that's where and you're counting on the way mixing the bubbles across the.
No, when the bubbles come up, they're going to form a cell.
Right, yep.
And then the next one will touch. Unless we want to be cheaper, in which case we'll pull them apart.
But you can get the cells to combine at 20 feet. Is what you're saying.
Well, remember the cells are going, if the water is 20 feet, let's say that the mixing cell would be, say, 200 feet across. So the next diffuser would then be another 100 feet this way. And then the cells would overlap. They're to be smeared by the wind a bit.
Right, and then your diffusers, are they just a flat top diffuser, or do they have a cone with some draw mixing in?
They're flat, and they got this root, and they're rubber, so they pop a bit like this. The entrainment occurs a foot or so above the diffuser, so it sucks it in like that. The diffuser's here, it's stuck in this way, either side, about 10 times above it.
When you drop this thing into 32 centimeters of sludge, it's not going to bury itself and cause head pressure?
If there's that much sludge, we'll have to check on
Yes,
it.
there is. I don't know why they didn't turn in there's a survey on that lake already. Did you read it?
I'm not sure I read
The
that.
survey was last year.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right.
French is not lying about how deep the sludge is.
Yeah, but remember this is pipe with air in it. It's not like a metal pipe.
Right.
But we'd check on it.
Well, I think the question was
it
answered.
would be nice if we could,
They're misleading these guys.
No, Mark, I think that they did a good job of answering the question, and thank you, and we'll, if there's another question from the audience, Mark?
Sorry, it was about 20 minutes late getting here before, but I don't know if this question has been asked, but from either of you, what guarantees are that this is going to work?
So the question is, what guarantees are there that this is going to work?
Define work.
Giving up her-
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll see improvements, but I guess that's my question too, is that the improvements that we want to see.
And Tina, you raised a good point, which is defining work, and maybe that is, what are our endpoints? What are the set points, our requirements as a board, as a district, that we want to accomplish? And I think those have to be addressed in that and guaranteed if we're going to spend, how much.
Well, you missed the first bit, which was what do you think the problems are? And I stated the problems were nutrients and blue-green algae. And of the systems that have been put in, as far as I know, they've all reduced the scums of blue-green algae. They haven't all reduced blue-green algae. Sometimes the single filaments, the ones that don't float, do well. So the chances it's going to work are pretty high that it will get rid of scumming blue-greens if we can get enough aerators in at the cost we can afford to mix enough of the lake. So since we're only, because you've got a shallow place at the other end where they could lurk and grow on us, you've probably got chances, I don't know, if you were to call a number out of the sky, perhaps 75% chance that you'd get a satisfactory solution to everybody. Because that's what the work is. I mean, there would be reductions in the blue-greens. Whether everybody in every dock would get a reduction, that you can't guarantee, because that's the way, but sometimes the wind blows them in anyway, you know, if there's only a few. But all the ones that we've used, that the system's been used in, have reduced the scumming blue-greens. That's what we're gambling at here, that method now is available for us that wasn't available before.
So if the, let's say you get a 20% reduction, 25% reduction, what is your commitment to us to come back under the cost of our existing contract to handle, you know, to seek out why that didn't happen and to improve where that's going?
Yeah. You wouldn't notice a 20% decrease. Something's got to be about a 30% before you'd even see it with the way these things are. I mean, the way they're spread out, there's a bad bit here, they're patchy. All I can say is the data I put up here showed a decrease in blue-greens total in Colorado, which is an 850-acre lake, from an average of about 60-70% to 1%. That's a good number to use. They put a system in similar to the one designed by me and Dr. O'Hara, who's going to be involved. We get the blue-greens to go from 60% to 0, essentially. That's a pretty good number on a pretty similar system. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about its likelihood of working. In a lake like this one, that's it's not a quarry that's 100 feet deep like this. It's shallow here and deeper there and that kind of thing. And then the final thing is to say, what else you got? You didn't hear this, but there are 17 methods that I'll discuss, and I'll go through them all. And you'll see that it's when you've got a lake like this that's nutrient rich, it's got blue-greens, it's not very deep, you don't have many choices. And, I think you could pick any expert in the world and they'd think, you don't have many choices. And I'll wrestle with those and come back with the 17 methods before we get back to these guys and say, this is the way we're going to go. Preliminary tool, and I've been around your lake, I've been on the boat, I've looked at the data. It looks to me like some kind of aeration mixing will be the way to go. But the final decision I'll make when we start the contract. And then we'll come back and say, yeah, and then we'll get back to these guys.
That's the 17 is where you give them the yeses or the no's.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
We heard that first.
Okay.
Maybe to further answer whether you can put these diffusers in sludge that's deeper than, the project we just did in Junction City, we have as much as 4 feet of sludge in some of the areas where our diffusers went in, and it's working fine.
It's fluffy, watery.
It's
sludge.
fluffy, yeah. The sludge usually, and in the bottom of the lake, I mean, you couldn't stand on the sludge. I mean, you just go right straight through it. It's real fluffy. And what happens generally is when you put these diffusers down, they'll move that material. They'll form a cone.
Yeah, sure.
And they'll move that material out of the way, and they'll ultimately settle to a position.
So does that material biodegrade with the oxygen and the water movement? It is
Quite a bit of biodegrading in the fine air bubbler system. I don't think you'll see the same result. Dr. Horn could answer that better. I haven't, really been involved with the large air, but I don't think you're going to see the same results as far as dissipating the sludge in the bottom from the large air. The fine air starts its treatment right at the bottom and treats upward, and so it does tend to pick that old sludge up and release the nutrients and digest it.
Sewage sludge is also more digestible.
That's right.
You've got sediment, you've got inorganic sediment in your lake. You've got bits of bits of twigs and stuff. They're
Oh,
not
yeah.
going to be drank very easily.
Lots of that.
Lots of that. And that's not going to change by the air.
Thank you. Was there another question from the audience? Yes, sir.
Kind of a noise guy. These compressor sheds, these soundproof compressor sheds, how many do you see on the way?
If I understand the question correctly, is can we soundproof the,
No, how many?
How many do you see stationed around like these compressor stations?
the number, I believe there's just going to be one or two.
One or two. We're looking right now, Sandpoint looks like the best location.
It looks like a really bad one.
We could go both ways there.
I'm really concerned about the noise,
Yeah, and you should be.
and I'm not okay with some noise.
Yeah, you need to go and see one of these and
Without seeing it there, seeing
Yeah.
examples that I don't know about, so.
Where is one?
Like a blower room, basically, is what you're talking about. And
Yeah, it's a blower room.
Yeah, they're noisy, and having worked in that, if you go inside that building, you put hearing protection on, and outside it, you can dampen that down, but it's just a number of dollars, I think, to make it go towards 0 decibels. I mean, you can work that direction, but it is a cost thing. And then, of course, it's the venting and making sure that you don't suffocate that machine, like happened at Cherry Creek by not allowing enough air exchange and that sort of thing. So.
And for Sandpoint, when I go there, be quiet with the lake. So when you're hanging out with this compressor, I don't see how you're going to adjust.
I've stood next to compressors, the ones in Cardiff. We have about 5 on that one, I think. And I've stood next to them, and they're about the size of a very large commercial fridge. And they're very quiet. The compressors are not very big. You don't need that much air. So you can also put them in vaults as well. They can be very decrease the sound, so that you can get more room there. The reason for Sandpoint is you can go 2 ways, up the lane and down the lane. Otherwise, you'd have to put them, they have a regatta and run up one way and put one somewhere else and run it across another way. You start with them in the deepest areas, then move out. So you imagine strings of these pipes across the bottom.
So I think that the question, the concern, and rightly so, is that if we were to move forward with this, sound is a major concern
Sound is something that we can engineer.
It's just a matter of dollars, how much do you want to spend to decrease it. The more you want to decrease it, the more you got to spend, but it's doable.
Right. Thank you.
Most definitely.
One of the other thoughts that, for design-wise, that we've been looking at is actually Holmes Road Park, which is obviously a public space too, and people like to go there for quiet time too. But there is a pump station there too. There's 3-phase power there.
Well, and
that-
it's a larger area
And
where
it's
we
a
could get
larger
it
area.
further away from homes.
So there's some other, that would be the other primary option, certainly, and one that we've chatted with the city about, just starting the preliminary. Of course, you're just in this phase right now where you're looking at, are you wanting to design something like this? So.
Can you lease the equipment, the compressors, and have the leaseholder take care of the equipment?
Lease the equipment.
That's certainly an option.
I'm just saying, isn't it cheaper that way? And you're not on the hook for the maintenance?
Well, you're going to pay for the maintenance, whether you pay for it directly or whether you pay somebody else to do it. But like Taser, there is a gentleman I know because he's working with Junction City right now, and he's doing the warranty maintenance on the Taser blowers.
But Taser does lease them too.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Thank you. One question, sir?
How long is this going to go? It's going to go seasonal, like in the fall, for what, 3 or 4 months? The system will be on. So how many years, or how long is it?
Forever.
This is forever.
But
And I think we're talking 6 months, like April to November is
Right.
what is in that.
Right, right.
Blue-green seed.
Right.
But yeah, until you can somehow work out to get the nutrients down to what they were maybe 100 years ago, it will be on hold. You might be able to, shave a month off with practice. The ones we've been using in Southern California on Lake Elsinore, we did reduce the amount of time they were on, but they just found it was so much regulatory permit problems, going back to ask if they could come back, and they decided 6 months and dealt with it.
Regarding the removal of the sludge, I did a quick calculation on the volume. With the lake being about 680 acres, and assuming a 2-foot depth of sludge throughout that 680 acres, we have approximately 2.2 million cubic yards of sludge. And at $15 a cubic yard, that ends up being $32.9 million.
Perfect.
You probably do half of that.
Did you say 2 feet?
2 feet.
Yeah, I'm thinking more like 8 feet.
Say you had your own equipment and your own labor, and say it only cost you $5 a cubic yard, that'd still be $10.9 million.
So it'd be a few million to make a difference in any case.
Okay.
An expensive option.
Any,
I think this previous gentleman might have been, were you asking how long does the system, how long does one system last? What's the useful life of the first system? Is that part of your question?
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder, over the years, we'll have to keep contributing at least to keep the maintenance of this going. We're talking about $100,000, what's the future look like?
I asked that question.
This is just for the initial system.
Yeah, I asked that question to Dr. Horn
This is for
before,
design.
and he said the useful life of the first system is about 20 years. So you have to start replacing things. Yeah.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not maintenance-free, and again, I'll apologize, I've worked with the fine air bubblers, but those diffusers, we have to pull them up and make sure they're clean from time to time, and in that system, we have to give it an acid bath. Obviously, we wouldn't be doing that in a lake, in the large bubble system, because it's not going to get plugged near as easy.
But the compressors last a long time.
Yeah.
And the maintenance is pretty small. It's just you change the oil and you change the filters. It's not a big deal on maintenance. The cost that's going to be there is the power cost, the simple electricity cost. So the more we can cut that down in terms of time and period, the cheaper it will be to run.
Are these other locations near salt air that might have an adverse effect on the machinery or the equipment?
So the question is, are these installations near salt air? And I think it would be more of on, installations for your coastal zone stuff. I mean, that would be, I don't think we're going to find a system, the underwater bit that's associated with that, but certainly the industrial wastewater side, I think you could probably answer that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Anything that's, like the building, the blowers, would be industrial. You wouldn't want to put the blowers outside because of the salt air. You're going to want to have a pre-filter so you keep the salt air from getting directly into the filter itself.
But I guess the question is, have you got experience with that? And with,
Yes, yeah, we do. Like I say,
He missed that. He would miss that.
75, 80% of our work is on the coast,
Yeah.
and has been for the last 19 years. So,
So that wouldn't adversely affect the longevity of the system?
being on the coast always affects the longevity. I'm not
It
gonna lie.
increases our longevity and reduces equipment longevity.
But it's, I guess it's the experience of having, had things that failed, I suppose, prior to the time that they should have, because they didn't have the right finish on them. A good example is I still see engineers today that they'll put a railing up with 304 stainless steel. Well, 304 stainless steel on the coast, the salt air turns it, makes it look like it's rusty. Doesn't hurt it any, but it makes it look like it's rusty. So you got to use 3/16 stainless steel. Made that mistake the first time I put a rail system up. I haven't made it since. But it's things like that you learn as you work on the coast. That, yes, this is an environment that's much, much different than the valley or Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon.
Are there any other questions that haven't been answered from the audience, from the board?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you
Gentlemen.
very much.
Nice to meet all of you. It's a lot different than the local improvement district that I gave a presentation to.
In a good way.
None of them wanted the sewer.
Great.
Been there, done that.
Hey.
All right.
Ready to adjourn?
Let's try to make this, let's try to, maybe some of these things we can put off, but we'll try to go through things pretty quickly. Let's take a quick,
We don't want to keep the city guys here too late.
right.
Should we defer to the manager's report? We don't have to do
Right.
I've
I've been up since 2:30.
You want to break for 5 and then?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and take a quick break for no more than 5 minutes so that we can go to the restroom or. That's fine.
So we have to do the budget officer.
How you doing over there? We didn't introduce you because you guys know that Rick is the editor of the
Oh, no.
Yeah, he was here earlier. He's now our editor of the
So is he still working for you, Brian?
Yeah, you know, he only does bankruptcy cases for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's just really good. I don't have to do much.
Yeah.
And so he says he's got time to do that stuff.
good.
So it's very good.
I knew that there were big upshakes in the news guard.
Yeah, like everybody's new.
Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote a nice. He writes well. And,
Well, yeah, I just,
Yeah, I don't know.
were you at the
He has a lot of
meeting that he
recordings.
gave the presentation on the grant writing? I think you were
no,
gone.
that's what I missed.
Yeah.
It was December.
That was really well written. Did a good job of speaking about it.
Just a little bit dismissive of
We had a couple of
Chase.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe we should give him a shot.
Well, and
We can talk.
we were, Ken and I were talking about that too. I think she did a really good presentation. $30 spent to feed.
I support that, and I think each was
Something along those lines. And the one thing that really hooked my interest in that meeting about this is the tribe is actually a short corner that we would be eligible for grants.
well, and then Ken saying these options.
Qualify for.
How you doing?
Oh, yeah.
So anyhow, but yeah, you know, I,
Tell my voice.
it sounded like, you know,
Down my chest.
Well, which is valid.
no, it is valid, but, yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, they had a
Pages and pages and pages.
So, in the packet with it's
It's gonna, it's kind of a tough one. I mean, you know, just because she does the people.
Well, and this whole, I mean, that, we haven't even started talking about, you know, how we're gonna pay for all this. And I am not, that is not my specialty at all. I don't understand how you go out and. That is way over.
There is
Yeah, well, and it's a pretty specialized area. I know.
Well, the other thing.
But really, what we have to do, what you have to do is you have to do
That's why you've got links through the.
couple firms.
So did you get any from the public?
Yes, we got 3 questions from the public.
And we're just the rah-rah people that go around.
And they were the last
Sell it.
Yeah.
Will the watercolor change? We're taking clear to the bottom, most of the effect will be in a few weeks, a couple of years later.
Sure, we have to, it's got to be the same as
How will the
accessory.
fish be affected?
Sure, we have to have an election.
Better, especially sensitive ones like.
Just like a school levy, right?
Yeah, because I mean, the only way,
Is if
well, it depends. If we can pay for
Yeah, we're staying in Woodburn.
No, but we don't have near enough revenue. Oh, you mean if we could cover the bond with our own revenues?
yeah, cover the bond.
Oh,
But,
yeah, I don't know
but
that.
I don't think.
and there wasn't a link there.
I wouldn't think so.
I don't, there wasn't a link to revised.
No, I asked Leslie, she has a little real estate calculator, I said, I asked, what is, it was close, I said, what's $2 million? So, hopefully that's extreme out. 4% for 20 years. I know it's 20 years.
Well, she's your neighbor's administrative.
I didn't see it in the packet.
Yeah,
4%.
4%, which I think is high right now for a bond rate.
You had a year.
And it was like, we're kind of on the edge of being able to handle. It was like, 7,000 a month.
I told Rick I told him. Yeah, 8,000. This time. He wants
I think that's authorized for 20 years.
the contract, so he's.
No, it'd be, no, 800, no, I'm talking the 2 million would be about 8,000.
Yeah.
Except for new position.
Yes. Yes.
I was
And 2% was
snuck out of here.
Yeah, I noticed
I'm
that.
just trying to get an idea if we could.
Quietly left.
See, it wouldn't be, you know what it would be?
So
It wouldn't be, we wouldn't do a bond if we could do it ourselves. What we just go get a loan. And the, Devils Lake Water Improvement District signs a loan pledging to, pay back $2 million at 3% interest for 20 years at $7,500 a month. We sign the note and that's it. I mean,
Move forward.
So you said 20 years?
yeah. Which is maybe doubtful if the system's only, because we're a public body, they might be like.
So here's the bond calculator. I just don't know how to use it.
Change in the amount of algae, it's just the makeup of the algae. But really, our goal should be is to eliminate
It was in that zone. They're giving it 2%, 4%, somewhere between a low of 6,000 a month to a high of 1 million. That was kind of the range and that was for 2 million.
Right.
Trying to
So obviously,
an environment where the good algae is able to thrive rather than
hopefully,
So it's 2 million at 4% over 20 years is 12,000 a month.
do that.
oh, okay. I didn't ask it. I was, okay, if the cost is deal, we do have 500 in there. So put that in borrow $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, so I must have started at $1.5 million
Okay.
and worked my way down.
Yeah.
Have green, they still have good algae in the water, and they promote and tell people that, hey, this is the good algae now. Bad algae,
That's the catch.
Well, and you don't get that paint with the good algae. I mean, anybody who's lived here, we know what the good algae looks like. They ruined all our bathing suits.
It doesn't have the same aroma.
No.
You know, honestly, the green tinge to the lake with just good algae doesn't bother me.
No, nobody. It's the paint and foam and stench and killing our dogs.
And I think I got some different information. I had some misconceptions, maybe a little bit, so I feel like.
Yeah. I'm not as. That would help. So there's some things that.
Reading some stuff about how they were, Sharon, you guys see that they're getting, you can get like 6 inches.
Yeah, who said that?
I brought you literature that said that.
Yeah. But where was that from, I guess? Was that in Washington? Or is that the one in Colorado? Or Cherry City of Colorado? There was one we were going to go visit in Colorado.
Cherry Creek's in Colorado.
Oh, okay, maybe that's the one. Yeah, we're on like a 15.
Yeah, we should get either knocked out real
We
quick.
have to do the budget officer,
Right, we have to.
but that's all we were.
Okay, let's go ahead and end our break, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, next on on our agenda for tonight is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes from the previous meeting and the financial report?
I'll make a motion, we accept the consent agenda.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Did we have any comments from that signed up for non-agenda or agenda items from citizens?
Ask, I don't have the sheet in front of me.
Are there,
Anybody?
is there anybody that would like to speak? Steve? If you could state your name and address, please.
Steve Brown, 1615 Northeast Lake Drive. I have to end up thinking where I am. First of all, I want to say thank you for the presentation tonight and the information that went out to the public. I think it's valuable information that will help the district make a responsible decision on what to do with regards to the clarity of the lake. Second thing I would like to point out, in the packet, I want to congratulate Paul, if it was your idea or actually the board, and the new charts in the packets on projects that are pending and our progress on the charts. If the public hasn't seen what do they call them, NAT charts? Is that how you properly?
Not sure of the pronunciation, but
NAT, I think is what it's called. It's a great tool. I've used them in the past in businesses that I've been involved in. The most important feature of this is it puts monuments on paper. It puts timelines, and it shows, most importantly, the progress for each monument. I think it's going to really help the public and the board, and I thank you for initiating this program. Thanks.
That was Bill's idea that we implemented.
It's very good.
Yeah, I want to say I think it's great too, and what's helpful is, I think, not so much the timeline, although that's important, but it shows you what you can do concurrently and consecutively, which is just really nice to know and nice to see, and makes planning a lot easier. So,
Thank you.
good job,
Thanks.
Paul.
Anyone else? like to comment? Right. Unfinished business, then.
Mr. Chair, may I make a recommendation that we maybe do G and H tonight and skip over A through F?
I have no problem with that. Any other discussion from the board?
No, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I would at least mention they are, breaking ground on the sewer project up there, so, that's a big
Oh,
milestone
okay.
going on.
Couldn't get out of my garage this morning. I got a hole in front of my driveway.
Very good.
So,
It's a good thing.
All right. Dee River dredging, then. Paul, where are we at on that?
So, as is shown in the staff report, we've submitted the sediment evaluation framework. There's the Gantt chart associated with that. We've got our Army Corps permit number associated with this. We've got I'd say it's probably 80% gravel lease application drafted now. I don't know what the Gantt chart says there. My glasses, I don't have my glasses on. So a little bit further on that. And probably 20% on the removal fill permit application completed thus far as well.
Okay, yeah, I looked at your level 1 sediment evaluation framework. I thought that was a nice job on that, and I talked with Liza Ely. I know you sent that to her. I know last meeting we talked about getting a formal proposal from her as far as any kind of permit, either review or actual doing permits for us. And she's been sick for a number of weeks, just like some of the rest of us have. She stated that she would be willing to do that kind of work for $50 an hour if the board needed her to do a formal kind of contract. She could submit that to us, but I talked to her on the phone today because I hadn't heard from her, and that was what she stated to me. So in the future, if we would like to get some help with doing permitting or review before we submit it, we can go ahead and do that for $50 an hour from her.
Is that something you want some action on now, or just, that's just informative for?
Informative that we can do that. I don't think we need to engage her services at this time, but she certainly, she told me that if she were to do a review of this herself, it would probably take her 4 hours to do everything, so that would be an additional cost to whatever we did for this permit that you sent her. So just gives us an idea of what those services would cost.
4 hours she would have utilized to review that and provide comments.
Yes.
Good to know.
Okay. Committees.
So I sent the board basically a draft. I got to find my copy because here we go, of policy and procedures associated with establishment and governance of the Devils Lake Water Improvement District blank committee. And so this is kind of a template that I've devised based on reviewing the City of Bang, City of Lincoln Cities, works St. Albans, and one other kind of coastal town that I got some copies of some information associated with committees.
Warrenton, I think.
Was it Warrenton? Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was Warrenton. And basically, the way I see this would be a fill-in-the-blank thing for, the board to decide on with advisement from likely the person that would be chairing that or the committee member representative from the district. Mostly just the powers, really, what do you want them to be doing? What do you want to tell them to do on your behalf? Give them power to do. Of course, that's part of that is in the purpose and establishment, like identifying it in brief. But really, it gets down to what the powers are. The other thing would be how many people you want on a committee. That might be variable for, say, a planning and event committee. You might want 20 people on a committee for implementation and actually having them being associated with it. But just maybe 5 or so we talked about for other committees. I don't know. Those are things for you to decide and to kind of develop. The other aspect is how do you select a committee? I've done some research as far as what the city's doing. They've just went through a big process with that. I know that you're at least somewhat familiar with what they've been doing. They just finalized that. I think Chester probably left, I think, at their second to last meeting there. So that I didn't get the full, interpretation back to you on that. So as far as how you want to select a committee, the one big one that I think is out there is, and something that the City of Lincoln City does for their committees, is they do it kind of like, it's almost like a job interview kind of approach where somebody submits an application, there's a couple people that review it. The way they've landed on it is that it's not a public meeting, but there's 2 council folks present, and then they make individual recommendations to the HR person, and then that HR person runs a background check against those 1 or 2 individuals. Often it might be the same person that they land on. Both recommendations might say David Skirvin's our best candidate or whatever, but maybe they do have 2 or 3 that they run background checks on, depending on what the recommendation is. If the background check's clear, then that person moves on to the full council's kind of determination if they want to appoint. So it kind of is that vetting process. So that's what the city has in place. If we were to do something similar, it would basically, we would receive applications. You would have a selection committee, have those kind of, and you can do it either way. You could have it be a public meeting like your budget committee interviews have been. They come up, they tell you what they think, why they should be on the budget committee, and you make a selection, or you do it kind of more behind the scenes so that people can kind of really, the reason they chose to do that is they felt like they can get more from an applicant when they don't feel like they're on stage and have that kind of nervous factor or whatever is associated with being in front of a microphone and being on TV and everything else, so that then they can do that first vet, and then the board would get a copy of the application still too. So they would have that you would have that to rely on, independent on whether or not you were one of the persons that interviewed the folks. You would have a background check if you so choose to have it and the main reason that they've implemented the background checks is associated with, I think it's like the workplace violence reality that's in our world now. There's issues with people that you want to have a first screen potentially on them if they're in large groups and they've got a history of being violent. That was one of the reasons they wanted to know that. There's certainly dollar issues, I guess, and certainly child welfare conditions associated with event planning in particular. So, in fact, as you consider that, if you were to put somebody on a sewer committee that maybe you don't really feel like you have a at-risk population that you're going to be working with versus an event committee, maybe you do. And so maybe you have separate protocols, but at the same time, then you maybe are just digging yourself too big a hole, and you should just have the same protocol back and forth, up and down. And that would probably be what any attorney would say. You wouldn't want to be biasing it depending on what committee they were on. If it's reasonable to have a background check for Committee A, it's reasonable to have a background check for Committee B, that kind of thing. So
I would think that you could say because of the scope of work of this committee, we require a background check, or because of the scope of this committee, we don't require a background check.
I think you could, and
you may not care if there's a child molester on the sewer committee.
right, well, yeah.
Maybe.
But that's the point, yeah, exactly. And so I guess what I would like from you is...
I guess, did we have to do a background check to be on the board?
No, and...
So it seems silly that we would require our committee members to have
But the population elects you, too. So there's a vetting process there through the election. So
Okay.
that came up when the city originally put in their background checks. And as you may remember, that came up. People are like, well, what's this? Why is this? Well, the public has an opportunity to do scrutinize public officials already, which if you're just appointed to a committee, you don't necessarily go through that process.
I just don't want to make it so onerous that nobody signs up on a committee.
Right.
How much do background checks cost? I can't recall.
So we get 5 free a year. So, if you only had one committee to fill right now, you'd have it done for free, basically. But if you were trying to fill 6 or so, But I think $40 is a pretty good number to look at. I've heard as low as $5, depending on if you have your police department do it, kind of thing, $5.15. But I think 40 is a kind of a upper limit of what it would cost per background check. And there's companies in town that do that. Kind of ironic. Actually, it's more than one.
Really?
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Not full-fledged companies, maybe private.
So, as far as membership goes, did you run into any limitations on, you don't want this one person to be on every single committee? Is there limits that some jurisdictions put in place to say you can only be on 2 committees at
No,
a time?
I've never seen that. And in fact, in small communities, it's even encouraged for people to be on additional boards, let alone committees. So like you could be on the city council and actually that's encouraged just to have, because the reality is people need to fill a lot of hats and fill a lot of voids. But yeah, so no, if you saw that there was a reason that they were in conflict, then maybe you'd make that decision, but I doubt that there would be.
Like if they owned a business that was in relation, that had something to do with one committee but not another, you might not want them on.
Yeah, if there was something like that, if we've addressed, but you would address that individually by committee member. So a committee member would have the same responsibility as you have for saying, hey, you know what, you guys are talking about building an aeration system. I have an aeration company. You are not awarding me the bid for this, but I'm just letting you know that I have an aeration system or a company. I'm still going to participate until you get to the point where you're making a bid, and you actually have an actual conflict in that decision. So it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have too many of those, but certainly the ethics laws do require those people to say, hey, yeah, this is my conflict or potential conflict.
Well, it was nice to be able to see that we could gather what someone else had done already, and we can use that to our advantage to formulate our committees and know how to run those. I did not have time to put together, we got this Tuesday night, I was in Olympia on Tuesday night, and I did not have time to put together the stuff.
The powers.
For my committee.
So you want us to bring this back with the committee that we signed up to chair, or guide, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I think that would be a
And then
favorable approach.
do we make recommendations for that particular committee, whether we think it needs a background check or any of that other vetting process or not? Or is that something that we all need to agree on for all the committees?
Well, you could certainly come back with a recommendation,
Okay.
and then the board could decide based on that recommendation. The board may decide if we're going to abandon it altogether, or we may do the blanket background check too, like the city does.
I guess I keep going back to, I don't want it to be too onerous to sit on a water improvement district committee where they're already volunteering their time to help us out.
Yeah.
I got to say that I'm shocked that an advisory committee that has no authority to do anything, that we've formally seen ask, concerned community members to make recommendations. is subject to the public meetings law at all.
Well, it's because you've vested power to them to make those recommendations to you. That's the reasoning. Because that...
It's just a recommendation.
It is just a recommendation, but it is...
Some of it is actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
like
to
the
speak.
water quality, those people will actually be out on the lake taking the water and taking it to the lab.
Yeah, and those are kind of more non-traditional committees, I think, when we look at like committees for within municipal governments, I mean.
Yeah, because I sit on the Lincoln County Solid Waste Advisory Committee, so we advise the county commissioners, and we are not subject to public meeting laws.
I would guess that you probably are, and you might not just realize what's going on in the background. Because if it's an advisory committee to a public body, that's a public, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they notice the meeting's public, I'm assuming. Public may not participate, and that's often the case even with, yours or any other meetings. The public is not necessarily required to be able to participate. It's just that they get to be able to listen to or observe. And in fact, the thing with electronic meetings, say if you wanted to have a teleconference thing, what you would have to provide is basically a microphone in a room or a speaker in a room so somebody could at least listen to what's going on and have email access to anything that was being sent around. So those rules are been tightened up associated with how technology has changed, but the reality is they're public meetings, and the public is welcome to listen and learn and participate often too.
Well, what if we don't formally empower the committees to make recommendations? I mean, but obviously, we form these committees, informally form these committees and meet and...
And you're the one that brings back the recommendation as the board member.
You bring back the committee members, have a chance to speak during our meetings if they want to. The board representative, can synthesize, these are the thoughts of the committee.
Or the community.
Or the committee and the committee.
Well, then that's still a recommendation, and it's still coming from a committee, and even if you're synthesizing it, it's actually even more so a recommendation that's come from the committee. The converse would be to have 5 people show up in a room, talk about stuff, and then all 5 come and tell you how they felt about it. Then that would be less of a public meeting. I would still say that they would lean to suggest that.
They have the opportunity in public comment to come and say what they thought about it.
Yeah, it's just how.
Well, I just want to look at it because I was surprised. I really didn't have a chance to look at it.
Yeah, I didn't layer in all that other ORS in there because it was pretty clear to me that it's a public meeting, but I didn't refine it to make it so publishable and nicely because it's just copied and pasted out of Oregon revised statutes and special districts, anyhow. But it's pretty clear that if you have an advisory committee of some sort like this, like you're seeking some sort of working committee that makes recommendations, then that's a public meeting. And that was even the case with, say, vetting the committee members that the city went through. They had to really structure that interview as to not be a public meeting. I mean, it was very difficult. And
yeah, like when we hired the city manager, there was, I don't know how many of us here. How was that not a public meeting?
I went to public meetings that they had, so I would assume that they all were. They were public meetings. They're noticed. Just because you're not in, you have a speaker and a microphone kind of thing, doesn't mean it's not a public meeting or it's not a noticed meeting.
Okay. I wonder if
Well,
that's why
also,
they...
Kind of glad you asked.
schools have local school advisory committees. They have committees.
And those are all public meetings, though. Think about it, though. They're noticed, they're at the grade school, come at 6 o'clock. That's a public meeting. They're not, that's obviously a public meeting, and they're notifying you as it to be public, and they're inviting you. So the idea is public involvement. It's just that you have the requirements of notice, taking minutes,
Publishing.
that sort of thing. That's what they're making sure you do.
I don't think it's that onerous. I mean, you
Right.
sit in the conference room down at the community college and tell people you're going to be there, and
Right.
Yeah.
you could do it at a restaurant if you
You
want.
can, yeah,
can.
as long as it's accessible,
Right.
and there's not discriminatory issues there with the place, they're not saying you can't come because you're color blue or whatever.
Do we have those places?
I hope not. But, yeah, so that's all written into the, can't be a smoking quarters, it's got to be non-smoking, I mean,
Dang
Rules of
it.
the casino.
yeah, so,
So the assumption is that at our February meeting, we'll come back and each of us that are in charge of each individual committee will come back with the rest of those
We'll
things.
come with a recommendation for the structure of the committee, and we'll all review it, and
Yep.
sounds good. And any, any thoughts on application process? I mean, that you want me to be working on as far as,
Can it just be like what we do for the budget committee, or
I mean, ideally, yeah, it'd be pretty simple,
we have these seats available, fill out this application, and submit it to the district?
we've established the following committees if you're interested in being on one or more.
and then you can kind of weigh in on the background check, I think is the biggest question I think that I would have for you.
We can just say that we have the option to do a background check. Because, I mean, most of
Yeah.
the people on the committees, we're going to people that we know. We want them on the committee.
Right.
Somebody, moves to town and just decides that they want to be on a committee, we don't know them, okay, maybe you say,
Well, if you do one, you have to do them all.
I think you're right, David, yeah. I think
You can't
don't want to
pick
be
and choose.
arbitrary.
You either do one or you do everybody going on a committee. I could see picking and choosing the committees that you do a background check for, but it's got to be 100% membership if you're doing it.
Okay, I am recommending that the septic inspection committee does not have background checks. There, done.
So I think that's appropriate. And
so
again,
each committee can have a different standard, a different set of rules.
well, I think somebody much more qualified than I should answer that question for you. Your attorney
I should
may
be the
want.
one being out answering it, but this just surprises me, and I haven't researched it, so I will, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. New business, office equipment and budget resolution for transfer of capital outlay. It looks like we need a new computer system.
We do. And this would basically transfer money to capital outlay and allow, then for like a second motion to expend money associated with improving your office equipment from where it is now and where it frankly needs to be, kind of in the short term. Things kind of sneak up and need to get taken care of, frankly. We
How old
didn't
is that
anticipate it,
computer?
but, I'm sorry?
How old is that computer?
Actually, Dave and I were talking today, I think it's like 7 years old. or
Oh,
something.
wow.
It's pretty old, yeah.
Do you think
It still looks fairly new, but it
No,
hasn't ran well
yeah.
for a lot of years. I mean, you'll look back in staff reports and be like, okay, wow, he's been just stealing with computer tech for the last 2 or 3 days, and, and trying to rehab things, and I think it's time. It's due.
Okay.
So,
You need a motion for that?
Need to adopt this resolution. It's a budgetary resolution. It would be Resolution 2016-01.
okay, I move that we adopt Resolution 2016-01, the transfer of capital outlay namely office equipment, whereas the district requires a new computer equipment and software to replacing the rapidly failing equipment. Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Devils Lake Water Improvement District hereby transfers $1,250.00 from the general fund to materials and services, public relations, capital outlay of office equipment. Do I hear a
I'll second your motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Let it be known that we adopted Resolution 2016-01.
I'll make a motion that we allow the manager to expend up to $2,000 on new computer equipment.
I'll second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Great, thank you.
Good.
I think I was negligent in actually providing you a better written one, so I'll have to get that printed up.
One that doesn't say sample?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Because
just let me know if you want some help.
I would actually appreciate that, David, thank you, yeah.
Budget Committee and Budget Process. There are currently 2 vacancies on the Budget Committee. Current members are the Board plus Holbrook. Is it Walke? Is that
Walke,
correct?
yeah.
Walke. Landis. The Devils Lake Water Improvement District is soliciting application through February 3rd, 2016, for appointment of 3-year terms for the February meeting. Tentatively scheduling a Budget Committee meeting for May 13th, 2016, at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in council chambers.
And so I was remiss to add that, just a thank you to former, now retiring member Moore and Willette, who served for their terms, and that's where the vacancies come from.
Oh, that's what I was just going to ask.
Have we had any applications yet?
We have 2.
We've had 2 applications. There are application forms on the back if somebody wants to grab one. I don't know if anyone grabbed them before, but that puts them in the back, and they're available on the website, and whatever copies are still back there, I'll put in front of the office where they've been.
So we've received, it, and we're looking for 2.
We're looking for
Okay.
2. One of them is a returning candidate, which budget law actually wants, encourages, almost requires. I mean, you can have somebody do a reauthorization effectively, but they want new blood. That's what budget law wants. So where you could get additional applicants to, I mean, you could still appoint somebody that had served before. Even if you had 10 applicants, you just said, you know what, we're still going with applicant A because we really think that person's the best one. But budget law, it's pretty clear. It wants public involvement, and so the wider net you can throw, the better. So just keep that in mind.
Yep.
Okay.
And there is a hot link there on the staff report.
Is there like a, is there, like, can you serve forever?
Well, I don't think it speaks to that.
There's no term
Term
limits?
limit, no.
Okay.
But, the idea is to get additional involvement.
Sure.
Okay.
Microphones on.
I move we appoint Paul Robertson, the budget officer.
Second.
Any other discussion or all in favor? Aye.
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 Paul, your budget officer.
Thank you.
I move we adopt the budget calendar as stated on page 10 of the manager's report.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Budget calendar is adopted as per staff report. Okay. Non-agenda items.
Just as a backtrack, thinking forward, anticipating maybe putting on your agenda for next meeting, maybe formal consideration of an aeration. I don't know where you want to go with that. Maybe thoughts on that. What you have. You were
When
told.
do you anticipate that list coming back from Dr. Horn of yeses?
That would be something you'd be paying for if you wanted to come.
Oh, okay.
Part of the work.
So that's a very small part of the work, too. I think it's like budgeted like $3,000, frankly, I think is of his $22,005, his fraction. So, so I'm kind of trying to understand what steps you would all want to be seeing happen in the near future.
Well, I'm certainly, I don't feel like I'm ready tonight to do that myself. There was a number of people from the community that came.
Let's put it on the agenda for next month, and that gives us a month to discuss with constituents and think through it ourselves a little bit. I think we've had information for a long time on this, and I think we just we're going to get to a point where if we wait too long, that's going to be 2018 before we can do anything, just because of the timelines it takes to.
It is 2018 already.
Well, it's installed starting in 17.
Oh.
So.
Right.
And those are fingers crossed to install, too.
Fingers are crossed.
Money available, permit available, fingers
Okay.
crossed.
So, it's not something that takes a long time, and, I guess I look at it and I go, the engineering part may never happen depending upon what comes out of the forward work, right? What the 17 list is, right? And what we decide to move forward with, right? If there's nothing on there we want to move forward with, then we're not spending the 77. We're only spending the 22 or whatever it was.
Probably even only 3, frankly.
Yeah, so
And we can do it that way.
Well,
I think we would
make sure the contracts
award the whole thing, but, if the work never happened because of what decisions get made based on outputs along the way, that's.
Can we just award the Dr. Horn portion of it and not award the grant portion of it until we get pieces of Dr. Horn's?
I don't think you want to do that. Because your scope of work that you've shot for is encompassing that, and then, because then
So
we're
it's
kind of
just
back to where we were.
you do it all, and if you don't use it, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, you're making a kind of a conditional offer in effect, potentially,
Okay.
like your contract's condition on secondary acceptance of, motion to proceed, or whatever that would be for you, based on, the review of that initial 17 lake and 5 watershed approaches, And like you said, it's not a lot of work for him to do that, because he's already looked at a lot of these things. He's looked at our lake already pretty extensively, just in preparing for tonight's meeting, for coming up here last April when we had him up here. And that's why he's not asking for all that much money to do that kind of either. So we'll bring it back to you February, and you can make decisions then.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to see you bring back, we can just have a provision in there that says it's subject to our right to terminate the agreement on X days' notice. With the end, we have to pay for everything they've done to that point,
Right.
and costs that they've incurred, but I don't think they should have a problem with a right to terminate. We just got to pay for what they've done to that point. So that should probably be added to whatever we consider at the February meeting. And we can maybe email them ahead of time and say, this is how we're considering it. Do you have, and explain, we may want to terminate this at, 3 steps down the road, because we're realizing that it's, it's just going to be too expensive, or we've got information that it won't work, or,
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to have a problem with that.
Yeah, what I heard from
Get
tonight,
their-
I didn't sense that was.
Get their
that was
informal
the
approval,
direction.
get their informal approval ahead of time, that they're okay with that, so when we consider it in February, that
That would be part of the official
it's
sanction.
something that they're going to sign.
Yeah.
If we do, we're just going to be considering, but
Right. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Let's see, where are we at?
Non-agenda
non-agenda
items.
items? Are there any non-agenda items from the board? Right.
All right.
Nothing else?
None for me, thanks.
Additional comments from citizens? Additional board comments? Meeting is...
I want to thank Mary Lee for stepping in over there. Sorry.
Right.
We stop making so much noise.
Yeah.
We forgot that Rick's now the new editor of the news.
Publisher. Did you say publisher or editor?
Editor.
Oh, I thought you said publisher.
Editor.
Oh, well.
Yes. So, very good. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks.